I grew up in eastern Montana, the kind of place where boredom swallows. Entire summers whole, and you re-left chasing any thrill you can find to convince yourself you're still alive. Back in high school, me and 5 other friends used to do this thing where we'd research murders that had happened in the surrounding counties. Then, like idiots chasing ghost stories, we'd load up a couple of cars with cheap beer, flashlights, and a camera, and go out hunting the locations. Not for some noble documentary purpose or anything smart. We were just thrill-seeking, drinking piss-warm beer, and trying to scare each other into puking or peeing our pants. We burned through the more famous sites pretty quickly, and when we ran out of known cases, we got good at finding other places. Mostly abandoned rural homes. You learn the signs real fast out here. Rut roads that vanish into tree groves, rows of unnatural-looking trees that seem planted rather than wild. Maybe an old leaning mailbox barely hanging onto its post. We'd take any excuse to veer off a county road and cut across a field. That's what we were doing the night we found it, the house. It was the beginning of September. Just warm enough to still fool yourself into thinking summer wasn't over. We spotted a tight cluster of trees out in a field that didn't match the pattern of the windbreaks used for farming. It was too dense, too circular. We followed the barely there path that had once maybe been a drive, and found ourselves staring at an old farmhouse tucked into the trees like it was hiding. The house wasn't rotted or falling down like most of the others we found. The roof was intact. The windows were grimy but not broken. The doors had padlocks, but someone had already smashed them off, or maybe just rusted them out. Either way, we got in without much effort. We entered through the kitchen. All 6 of us stepped inside and turned on our flashlights, sweeping the room like amateur detectives. It didn't take long to realize this place was wrong. The table was the first thing we saw. It was still set. 6 plates, 6 glasses, silverware, cloth napkins. Everything perfectly arranged like a family was expected to come in and sit down any second. It wasn't dusty like it had been untouched for decades either. Just still. The strangeness of it hit me in a delayed wave, like when your body finally realizes it's bleeding. We'd been in dozens of houses like this, and usually they were stripped, destroyed, or obviously vandalized. This place didn't feel like it had been abandoned slowly over time. It felt like someone had stepped out to grab something from the car and never came back. The fridge was full, though everything inside had turned into an unrecognizable sludge. The cabinets were loaded with canned goods, boxed meals, and baking ingredients. Some of it had expiration dates from the late 70s. One of my friends found a stack of mail still sitting on the kitchen counter. All of it postmarked from June 1978. Another found a TV guide in the living room with a UFO-themed cover. That part one remember clearly. The glossy page reflected my flashlight, and I remember thinking how clean it looked. Like someone had read it recently and set it down with care. There were photos on the walls. Black and white and color shots of a family of 4. Father, mother, teenage daughter, younger son. All dressed in the kind of bell-bottom, shag carpet 70s perfection that looked both dated and oddly artificial. The father's mustache was perfectly groomed. The mother's hair in a bouffant. The kids looked like a Sears ad. We didn't speak much. Nobody wanted to say it, but we all felt it. The air was too still. The furniture had dust, but not the kind that accumulates over decades. No rodents. No bird nests in the corners. Even the closets were full. Coats still hung in rows, shoes lined up neatly. The girl's room had posters on the wall and notebooks stacked under her bed. No signs of packing, no boxes, nothing to indicate anyone intended to leave. It wasn't just that they disappeared. It was like the house had been frozen in time, right as they were about to sit down for dinner. We split into 3 pairs to check the upstairs. There were 3 bedrooms, and me and my buddy Jake took the room closest to the stairs. It was obviously the boys' room. Bunk beds, model airplanes hung from fishing wire. A poster of a baseball player I didn't recognize. I barely had time to take any of it in before it started. From down the hall, the most blood-freezing scream I've ever heard in my life ripped through the silence. It was so loud and primal I almost dropped my flashlight. We sprinted toward the sound, voices overlapping, all of us shouting and panicking at once. The two guys who had screamed were white-faced and shaking. One of them pointed and just said, "You need to see it." We walked down the hallway like we were heading toward a cliff's edge. I felt that dread in my stomach, thick and rising. We stepped into the room, and I instantly knew why they'd screamed. It was a bedroom, maybe the parents' or the daughter's. Hard to tell because everything after that first glance didn't matter. On the far wall, across from the doorway, there was a bed, neatly made, blankets tucked tight, and sitting upright against the pillows, covered to the waist with the bedspread, arms resting calmly at its sides, was a life-size porcelain doll. It wasn't just a doll, it was human-sized. Pale white skin, black painted hair, eyes like deep glass that caught and reflected our flashlights. But what wrecked me, what made me physically sick, was that the head was turned just slightly toward the door. Just enough so that if you were walking in, it met your eyes directly, staring at you like it had been waiting for years. We didn't argue or speak. We turned around and left, running, pushing past each other down the stairs. Back through the kitchen, out into the night, scrambling into the car with this gasping, ugly kind of laughter that only comes from real terror. Once we were on the road, breathing fast and drenched in sweat, someone said what we were all already thinking. The house had been abandoned, yes, but someone had taken the time to set that doll up in that bed. Someone had decided that, before taking food or clothing or personal keepsakes, that they were going to position that porcelain monster in a way that would face anyone who entered. It had been waiting like that for more than 20 years. And worse, it hadn't just been left behind, it had been placed. Later, we tried to look them up, the family. We searched the names on the mail and photos. Nothing. No news of a car accident. No missing persons report. No stories about a tragic fire or murder-suicide or extended family. Nothing. Like they were ghosts before they ever vanished. We found that the county had seized the land in the early 80s for non-payment of property taxes, which probably explained the padlocks. But beyond that, there was no record. Just a sealed-up time capsule, like some cursed diorama forgotten in the woods. The part that never left me, though, the image I still see sometimes in my sleep, wasn't the doll's face. It wasn't even the fact that someone set it up intentionally. It was the feeling I had deep in my bones when I saw it. That whatever had left that house was still watching, still waiting, and maybe, just maybe, had never left at all. I was 14 when my aunt asked me to babysit her kids for the first time. I remember the exact month, the feel of the early fall wind shifting towards something colder. The sun had set just before they left, and the mountains had already begun to pull their shadows across the backyard like curtains closing. My aunt and uncle were going to a wedding over an hour away and wouldn't be back until well after midnight. I had agreed to it without hesitation. I was responsible for 3 of my cousins, aged 8, 4, and 1. The house sat isolated on the side of a mountain in rural western Pennsylvania. No nearby houses, no real roads, no lights visible from anywhere around. If you didn't already know where it was, you'd never find it. It was the kind of place where you could vanish completely, and nobody would know until it was much too late. Their home was set against a steep hill that sloped sharply downward behind the back deck. Below that was a rocky drop-off, and then a thick tree line that eventually gave way to a river. There was no fence, no barrier, just open space and gravity. The kind of terrain where one wrong step in the dark could end you. They had 2 driveways. One led to the main carport where they always parked, the side closest to the house. The other ran sharply down to a flat space in front of a basement garage that hadn't been used as a garage in years. That space, the one that felt removed and closed off from the rest of the house, was my uncle's workshop or man cave, but mostly it served as a cluttered storage area and play zone for the kids. Nobody parked down there. It was always littered with toys and bikes and plastic buckets filled with junk. Everyone in the family knew that. The whole area was a play space and completely off limits to vehicles unless you wanted to crush something. So when I saw the headlights, bright and high, coming down that back driveway, my stomach instantly dropped. It wasn't my aunt's minivan. It wasn't a sedan. It was a tall truck, the kind with off-road roof lights that turned the surrounding trees into glaring shapes and shadows. I was up in the loft playing Guitar Hero with the oldest cousin, my back partially to the giant front window that overlooked the carport. I saw the lights first reflected off the glass, then caught the outline of the truck moving down into the lower driveway, a place no one ever drove. A place that had only one entrance, and once you were down there, you couldn't see the road. Whoever was pulling in was intentionally isolating themselves. I tried not to panic. I told myself it might be a neighbor. Maybe someone who got lost, but that made no sense. This wasn't a place you stumbled upon. There was only one way in, no street signs, no passing traffic. You had to know someone to even find the gravel road that brought you this far into the hills. My 8-year-old cousin noticed my sudden silence. I asked him quietly if he recognized the truck. He leaned forward, squinting through the loft window, and shook his head, his face going pale. I ushered him down the stairs, trying to stay calm. The baby was asleep. The 4-year-old was half asleep on the couch, curled up and sweaty from a mild fever. I didn't want to frighten them, but my hands were already trembling. I picked up the cordless house phone and dialed 911. While I was on the call, I heard the sound that confirmed every fear I had. The garage door was rattling. Not gently, not like someone knocking to see if it was locked. Someone was yanking on it, pulling at it with force, trying to lift it. Then I heard the side door handle being twisted. No knocking, no voice calling out. Just attempts to open it. It was dark down there. The window showed no light. Anyone looking through would see clearly that the room was empty. They weren't checking if someone was home. They knew no one was in the basement. The basement stairs led up into the main floor of the house, and the door that separated them from the living room was just a few feet from where I stood. I locked it quietly, my finger trembling on the little push-button lock in the knob. I kept my voice steady for the 911 dispatcher, told her there was someone trying to break in from below. She stayed calm, but her voice got tighter when I told her how far up the mountain we were. The closest officers were 30 minutes away if they didn't get lost. She promised they would try their best, that she was notifying my aunt and uncle, but I could already feel the weight of being alone. Then I saw him. The sliding glass door that led to the back deck was large, nearly floor to ceiling. The lights were off in the living room, so my reflection hovered in the glass like a ghost. But behind it, beyond the glass, was another figure. A man. He was enormous, broad-shouldered, wearing layers of clothes, maybe a flannel shirt, and some kind of coat. His hair was long and unkempt, red or auburn, and his beard was thick and just as wild. He was grinning. That was the worst part. He was smiling in a way that made every hair on my body stand up. Not a friendly smile, not even a threatening one, just wrong. Like he was enjoying watching me freeze in fear. Behind him, I caught the shadow of a second person, taller and thinner, moving like they didn't want to be seen. I screamed. Not words, just fear. The cousin beside me gasped and whispered the name Mr. Jim. I looked at him and he shrugged, still scared, telling me he only met the man once, maybe twice, through his dad. Not a friend, not family, just a vague acquaintance. But now he was here, on the deck, looking into the dark living room where he knew no adults were home. I told him I was calling the police. I made sure to say it loud enough that the man outside could hear. He didn't try the handle. He didn't move. Just stared for another few seconds, smile fading, then turned and backed away into the dark. Eventually, the headlights lit up the trees as the truck reversed and disappeared down the gravel road. The dispatcher stayed on the line until a cruiser arrived, checking the perimeter. My aunt and uncle returned shortly after. My uncle was livid. Not at me, but at Mr. Jim. Apparently, there had been issues with him before, back when my uncle was using, something he never talked about but was obvious now. My aunt was shaking. She told my uncle to call him and make it clear he was never welcome again. But the part that still twists in my gut, the part that keeps me up at night all these years later, was the way he smiled. The kind of expression you make when you're thinking about something far ahead of where you are, when your mind is already in the next moment, planning what comes after. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He didn't try to pretend he was lost. He went straight for the basement. He avoided all the normal points of entry and headed for the one part of the house no one ever used. A part of the house that was dark, disconnected, and soundproofed by the ground. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't confused. He wasn't hoping to talk. I never babysat there again. My aunt left my uncle a few months later. The house was sold, and I never went back. But sometimes I still dream about that glass door, and the way the light caught the edge of his smile, like it wasn't the first time he had stood there, like he had been waiting for a night when only the kids were home. It happened during a trip I should have never agreed to take. We were staying in a remote house deep in the Utah desert, part of some paranormal investigation project a friend of mine, Drew, had gotten us all into. He was obsessed with the weird, the unexplained, the darkness people tried to pretend wasn't real. I wasn't like him, but he needed someone level-headed around, or at least that's what he said. I agreed more out of boredom than belief. But after that night, I wish I'd just stayed home. The house was low and wide, an old ranch-style building with thick walls and tiny windows that kept the desert heat out during the day and trapped a weird sort of stillness at night. The ceilings were low, the hallways narrow. The whole place felt like it had sunk into the earth a little too far, like it had been weighed down by something. There were no neighbors, no cell signal, no light pollution. Just sky and sand and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. We arrived late. I remember the sun had already dropped below the horizon, but the sky was still red. The kind of red that doesn't feel natural, like the sky was bleeding out. Inside, we split up into rooms. I took one of the smallest, just a narrow cot, a dresser, and a dusty digital clock wedged between the wall and the bed frame. There was nothing on the walls. No mirror, no photos. Just a raw, empty box. The others were still setting up equipment and running tests. I wasn't involved in that part. My job was just to be present, a control, someone who didn't believe, someone they could test reactions against. But I was tired from the drive, so I crashed early, laying on my side, back to the room, facing the wall. I watched the numbers on the clock change, watched it click over to 2:48, and then I must have drifted off. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember the sensation that woke me. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't a dream. It was a shift. A pressure. I woke up absolutely frozen. I wasn't groggy. I wasn't confused. I was immediately alert, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break my ribs. I tried to swallow and couldn't. My throat was tight. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't turn my head. I was still facing the wall, back exposed, body stiff with fear. Every part of me was screaming to stay still. I didn't hear anything specific, but I felt it. Something behind me. Something standing over the cot. It wasn't a presence like some New Age ghost story. It was weight. It was mass. There was something in the room, close enough to touch me. And I knew, deep in my bones, that if I turned around, I would see it. And if I saw it, something irreversible would happen. Images started flashing through my head. Not like a dream or a thought, but like something was shoving them into my mind. Bloody images, violent ones, faces torn apart, teeth where they shouldn't be, rooms soaked in red, screaming, pain. It felt like I was being flooded with memories that weren't mine, things I should not have been seeing. Then came the sound. It wasn't external. It didn't come through my ears. It was inside my head, like I had been dropped into an invisible crowd. Laughter, but not the laughter of joy or humor. It was layered. High voices, low voices, raspy, guttural, shrill. Thousands of them. All laughing at once, overlapping, not in rhythm or in unison, but chaotic. Mocking, relentless. Like I had walked into an auditorium of people who had waited centuries to laugh at one thing. Me. And then a new thought pushed its way in. One that didn't feel like it came from me. A suggestion, not a vision. Just a single idea, cold and perfect. End it. That was the first and only time in my life that the idea of killing myself entered my mind without context or reason. I wasn't sad. I wasn't desperate. It was just there. Simple. Clean. Like it was being offered as a solution to something I hadn't even known was a problem until then. I wanted to cry, but my body wouldn't let me move. I was trapped in my own skin. Paralyzed. I watched the numbers on the clock change again. 2:57. 9 minutes. It felt like a lifetime, and yet somehow, I had only been in that state for 9 minutes. Suddenly, the weight lifted. The feeling of being watched dissolved. The air in the room changed, like it had been pulled through a vacuum and released. I rolled over, finally, and stared at the empty space beside my bed. There was nothing, no shadow, no figure, but I knew something had been there. I didn't sleep again. I sat upright on the cot waiting for the sun. When the others started to stir and file out into the main room, I grabbed my stuff and waited by the van. I didn't want food. I didn't want coffee. I wanted out. While I was sitting in the front seat of the van, Drew's brother came out of the house. I didn't know him well. He didn't talk much. Always hung back, seemed more observer than participant. But he walked right up to me, his face pale and distant, like he hadn't slept at all. He looked me in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I couldn't help you this morning." That was it. No explanation. No context. Just those words. His voice broke a little as he said it, like he was holding back more than he was letting on. And then he walked away. I never told Drew what happened. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Part of me wanted to write it off as sleep paralysis or some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But I knew better. 2 weeks later, we got the call. Drew's brother had killed himself. Just before 3 a.m. The timing made me sick. The precision of it. As if something had touched both of us, but only one of us didn't survive it. I remembered the look in his eyes when he spoke to me. How hollow he looked. Like he'd already seen something he couldn't bear to keep inside him. Since then, the laughter comes back sometimes in my dreams. Never as loud. Never as intense. Just a whisper behind the walls. I wake up and the room is always cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning or drafty windows. The kind of cold that feels personal. I think about that night more often than I care to admit. I wonder if it was the place, or if it was us. I wonder if that house was built over something ancient, something hateful, or if whatever it was simply followed us home. Or worse, had always been with us, waiting for the perfect moment to make itself known. Most of all, I wonder what would have happened if I had turned over. Part of me thinks I would have seen something terrible. Part of me thinks I wouldn't be alive. And part of me thinks maybe, just maybe, what was in that room wasn't trying to hurt me. Maybe it was trying to show me something. But if that's the truth, I hope I never find out what. Because once you hear that kind of laughter, not just in your ears, but in your soul. It never fully stops. It just waits. This story doesn't belong to me, but it's haunted me since the day my friend told it. It belonged to someone I trusted, someone who never sought attention or sympathy, someone whose voice trembled when she recounted what happened in that house. And it wasn't just her. Her entire family backed up what she said. They never talked about it in public, but behind closed doors, they admitted it too. Something was wrong with that place. And when it finally showed itself, they didn't wait around. My friend was 13 when her family moved into the rental. It wasn't far from the edge of town, not exactly remote, but surrounded by woods and far enough away from the main roads that it felt cut off. The kind of quiet that never feels calm. The kind that makes you notice how loud your own heartbeat is. She said the feeling hit her the first day. That weight. The strange tension that clung to your skin the moment you stepped inside. Her parents felt it too. So did her brother. Even the neighbors, the few who ever came by, seemed reluctant to spend more than a few minutes inside the house. It wasn't a feeling you could describe, not easily. It was like the air was watching you. She never saw anything at first. Just the oppressive energy. The creeping dread that would slowly rise when you were alone, especially in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room. Shadows felt too deep. Silence dragged too long. Rooms that should have been comforting felt foreign, like they didn't belong to the people who lived in them. But everything shifted on one particular afternoon. The moment that changed everything. That pushed her family past suspicion into something close to terror. She had just gotten home from the park. The sun was still up, and the wind had started to pick up, rustling the dead leaves across the porch as she approached the front door. She heard voices inside before she opened it, her parents arguing. The sound was coming from the kitchen. That struck her as strange, because both her mother and father worked late, and she hadn't seen their cars in the driveway. She froze just outside the front door, her hand hovering over the knob. She called out casually, saying, "Mom?" expecting to hear footsteps or a greeting or maybe an explanation. Instead, the arguing stopped. Complete silence fell, like someone had hit mute on the world. Then, a moment later, she heard her mother's voice answer, "We're just in here." It was those 4 words that made her stop breathing. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the way they were spoken. Something about the tone. It was her mother's voice. Same pitch, same rhythm, but it felt hollow, like it had been run through a filter that stripped away the emotion, the personality. It was just too clean, too perfect. Like someone copying her mother without understanding how people actually speak. She didn't open the door. Instead, instinct kicked in, primal and cold, and she backed away. She turned around slowly, heart pounding, telling herself maybe she imagined it. Maybe it was just something weird with the acoustics or the wind. But when she looked back up at the house, she saw her mother's face in the window. It was the living room window, the one next to the couch they rarely used. Her mother was standing there, looking out, expression blank. But it wasn't just blank, it was wrong. No recognition, no smile, not even confusion. Just a face staring outward, as if looking at something far off, or through her entirely. The eyes were open but unfocused. The mouth was slightly parted. It was her mother's face, yes, but without any of the warmth or humanity. It didn't blink. She turned and ran. Not down the street, not to a neighbor's house. She just ran to the edge of the yard and stopped, breathing like she'd sprinted a mile. She sat there until her brother came home. When he asked what happened, she told him everything, and together they went inside. But by then, nothing was there. The house was empty, quiet, cold. Her mother and father got home later that evening, both of them exactly where they were supposed to have been. Her mother laughed nervously when she heard the story at first, brushing it off. But later, once the kids had gone to bed, She told her husband that she didn't think the house felt right either, that she'd had dreams, that she kept thinking she saw someone out of the corner of her eye. They searched the house top to bottom, found nothing, but the locks on the back windows had been unlatched. After that day, the family changed. No more late-night movies. No one wanted to be in the living room after dark. Her father started sleeping with a baseball bat beside the bed. Her brother started using the lock on his door every night. And my friend, she just stopped sleeping entirely. She'd sit up in bed, waiting, listening for voices that didn't belong to anyone she knew. They didn't last long in that house. Maybe 6 more weeks. The final straw came when her brother saw someone at the end of the hallway, standing perfectly still, watching him. He said it looked like his mother at first. Same robe, same build, but she wasn't moving. Just standing there, head tilted slightly. When he called out to her, she didn't respond. And then, she stepped sideways into the dark and vanished. Not down the hallway, into the wall, like she had never been real. They packed up the next morning. When they asked the landlord if anything strange had happened in the house before they moved in, he was quick to deny it. But something in his voice cracked, like he'd rehearsed the answer too many times. He admitted eventually that the house had seen a lot of tenants come and go, more than usual. Most stayed less than a year. Some left without explanation. A few skipped out on the lease entirely. He said, "People just don't seem to settle in there. They didn't go back to get the security deposit. They didn't return any of the furniture. They just left." And ever since, my friend swears she still sees her mother sometimes, in reflections. In crowds, in windows, always just for a second. Just long enough to catch the face. That same expression. Not angry, not sad. Just empty. A perfect copy. Watching. And never blinking. It was a January night, cold even by Panhandle standards, and the kind of night where even the wind sounded tired. I was the only state trooper on duty in our stretch of nowhere, Texas, covering a zone where the next real town was over an hour's drive in any direction. Our roads had iced over by mid-afternoon, and I'd already been out all day working fender benders, sliding cars, and one nasty rollover that thankfully didn't kill anyone. By the time I finally crawled into bed, my bones were sore, my radio was quiet, and I was praying for 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep. That didn't happen. The phone rang around 3 a.m. I sat up, heart already pounding like it always does when you get a call at that hour. Grabbed the receiver, grunted out a greeting. The dispatcher, sweet voice as always, said, "Sorry to wake you, Dan, but we've got a wreck west of Lakeview, right near the 658 junction. All other units are still tied up on the pileups over on 287 and I-40. She didn't need to explain. I already knew no one else was coming. I just said, "Yeah, okay," and pulled myself out of bed. My wife stirred, pulled the covers tighter, mumbled, "Be safe," like she always did, half asleep, but always listening. I gave her the usual, "Always, babe," as I layered up for the cold. The wind had laid down since sundown, but the temperature had dropped even further. I could see the glaze of ice across the yard as I stepped out onto the porch. My unit was parked under a thin sheet of white, an '87 Mustang with a police package. Great car in summer. On ice, it handled like a shopping cart with no wheels. I scraped the windows, beat the doors open, and cranked the engine. It roared to life, which normally made me smile. But not tonight. Tonight, I already had a knot in my gut and a tightness in my shoulders that I couldn't shake. The roads were sheets of glass. I eased through town, tires whispering across the ice. No headlights, no taillights, no signs of life. Just the trees cracking under frozen weight and the occasional shimmer of ice tumbling from branches under the pale moonlight. Everything had that eerie bluish glow, like the world was made of crystal. Beautiful. and quiet in the way that makes you feel like you're the last man left. That's when I saw him. At the edge of town, just before the highway opened up, there was a phone booth under a street lamp. That in itself was strange. We hardly had any of those left. But what froze me was the man standing underneath it. Tall, way taller than me, dressed in a long black coat that brushed his boots, with a wide-brimmed hat tilted forward just enough to shadow most of his face. He didn't wave, didn't step back, just raised a hand and gave me a slow, deliberate signal to stop. I did. He opened the passenger door without asking and folded himself inside. Barely fit. His knees were practically touching his chest, but he didn't complain. Just stared ahead. "You the one in the wreck?" I asked him. "Yes," he said. That's all. Just one word, but it landed like a stone in the pit of my stomach. His voice was deep, quiet, and had this strange delay, like he had to remind himself how words worked. We pulled out onto the highway, and I asked him where the wreck was. He pointed, didn't say anything, just raised a long pale finger and pointed west. It was like writing with a statue. He didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, knees jammed into the dash, eyes hidden under that damn hat. The only sound was the crackling of the heater and the occasional groan of the engine fighting for traction. I tried to shrug it off. Weird folks out here weren't rare, but something was off, beyond off. The ice glittered under the high beams as we crested a hill. That's when I saw the Suburban. Upside down in a shallow ditch, not far off the road, steam rising from the engine. No other cars around. No tracks in the snow but ours. I pulled off, told the man to stay in the car, and started walking toward the vehicle. The incline was just enough to make my boots slide. I crouched low, one hand against the ground to steady myself, flashlight in my other hand. The closer I got, the worse the feeling got. I wasn't scared exactly, just tense, on edge, like walking into a room where a fight had just happened. I reached the Suburban and shined my light through the windows, and that's when I saw her. A woman, elderly, white hair, skin like paper, eyes closed. She was strapped to a gurney in the back of the Suburban, completely still, wrapped in a white cloth. At first, I thought maybe she was alive. Then I realized what I was looking at. She wasn't a passenger. She was a body. She had been prepped, dressed in what looked like a burial outfit, hands folded, mouth closed. I stumbled back, slipping slightly on the ice, catching myself on the rear bumper. My breath caught in my throat. The cold air burned. I turned, looked back at my unit. The man was still in the passenger seat, still, watching, and it hit me. The way he sat, the way he didn't talk, the way he didn't react to anything. I climbed back up the hill and opened the passenger door. My hand was already on the grip of my sidearm, not out of fear, out of instinct. I asked him flat out, "Who are you?" He turned to me slowly, and for the first time I saw his face. Pale, hollow, eyes set deep. He said, simply, "I'm the mortician." I just stood there, heart pounding. He continued, finally explaining that he'd been transporting the body when he lost control and flipped the vehicle. Claimed he wasn't hurt. Claimed he'd been walking to the nearest phone booth when I found him. I asked why he didn't tell me she was in the vehicle. He just said, didn't think it mattered. It did. I let dispatch know we had a body, gave them the full report. They sent backup, but it took almost an hour to arrive. By then, the mortician had gone quiet again, sat in my car like he had no place else to be. He didn't make a phone call, didn't ask about the Suburban, just stared into the snow. I didn't learn his name. I didn't ask. I didn't want to. When the other officers showed up, they took over. He answered their questions with the same flat voice, the same quiet detachment. He had all the right papers, all the right IDs. Everything checked out. Legally, it was fine. but none of it felt right. They asked if I wanted to follow them to the scene to finish the report. I said no. I got in my car and drove back to town. Even now, I can't explain why that night shook me so badly. It wasn't the dead woman. It wasn't the cold or the silence or the crash. It was the man. The way he sat in my car like he'd been waiting. The way he answered everything with just enough detail, never too much. The way his coat barely had a trace of snow on it, even though he claimed he'd walked half a mile through a storm. And the way he never once asked me if she was okay. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of night where everything's still and quiet, and nothing seems real. The kind of night where your thoughts echo louder than they should, and the darkness presses up against your windows like it's waiting to be let in. I was home, alone in my apartment, already half asleep when I heard it. The knocking. It came fast, urgent, frantic. Not polite, not confused, not accidental. Just sharp, desperate rapping that broke through the quiet like a scream in a dream. It was followed by a woman's voice, faint, muffled by the door, almost like it was trying not to be heard by anyone but me. She kept saying the same thing, her voice trembling just beneath a whisper. "Please help me." I froze. For a second, I thought I was dreaming, but the knocking didn't stop. It kept coming, 3 or 4 knocks at a time, short pauses between. Then her voice again, pleading, always the same words. I live alone on the 3rd floor of a locked apartment complex, one of those generic modern buildings they throw up in cities to pretend things are getting better. But I know my neighborhood. I know what happens here after dark. People don't knock on doors for help at this hour. If they need help, they bang on every door. They scream. They draw attention. This knocking was targeted. It was only my door, and that alone made the hair on my arms rise. I approached slowly, my feet barely making sound on the old floorboards. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to answer without knowing what was on the other side. I looked through the peephole, carefully, silently, but there was no one there. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Still, the lights flickered slightly, which wasn't unusual. The wiring in the building had issues, but in that moment, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I stepped back. My heart was pounding, and I didn't even realize I had been holding my own breath until I finally let it out. Then I heard it again. "Please help me." Clearer this time. Still soft. Still close. But definitely not coming from the hallway anymore. It was more like it was coming from the wall, from the air. Like it was being whispered directly into the room, bypassing everything solid between us. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. I just grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered almost immediately. I told her someone had been knocking, asking for help, but that I didn't see anyone outside. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She just told me not to open the door and that a patrol would be sent to check things out. I stood there in the middle of my living room, staring at the door, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I knew what I heard. I hadn't been asleep. I hadn't been dreaming. Someone was out there, or something. I remember reading something once, a warning people passed around online, about dangerous tactics criminals use to trick people into opening their doors. Usually, it was a baby's cry. Sometimes it was a lost child. Something designed to prey on your instincts, on your empathy, make you lower your guard. But I had never expected to be the person behind the door, deciding whether to help or survive. Minutes passed like hours. I kept pacing, listening for footsteps, for more knocking, for anything that would explain what had just happened. The voice never came again. Just that one message. Just those few words, over and over until it stopped. Like whatever it was had realized I wasn't going to fall for it. When the police finally arrived, I watched from the window as they parked and got out, shining their flashlights up and down the lot. They moved slowly, checking around the building, looking under cars, behind bushes. They didn't come up to my apartment right away, and I wondered if they thought I was overreacting. Eventually, one of them rang my buzzer. I let them in and met them at the door. They asked if I'd seen anyone, if I'd heard anything else. I told them everything, word for word. The voice, the knocking, the fact that no one else's door had been touched. They made a note of it, but they couldn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No camera footage worth checking. Just me and my nerves. They offered to stick around for a while, maybe patrol the area a bit longer. I thanked them, locked the door, and stood there for a long time after they left, staring at the wood, wondering if it would start again. It didn't, not that night. But something stayed with me. A question I haven't been able to shake. How did they know? How did they know I lived alone? No friends nearby, no roommates, no pets, no family within driving distance. I keep to myself. I don't talk to the neighbors. I never post anything about my location. I don't even tell people which floor I live on. I don't leave lights on in obvious patterns. I'm careful. But someone knew. Someone knew enough to come straight to my door. To wait until the right time, the right night, the right silence. And whoever it was, they didn't just want to talk. That much I'm sure of. They wanted in. Sometimes I wonder if they'd been watching me, learning my schedule, waiting for the night I didn't check the peephole, waiting for the night I decided to care too much, to trust too easily. I barely slept that week. Every sound made my skin crawl. Every knock, even from neighbors, set my nerves on edge. And in those quiet moments, when I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, I'd hear it again. Not aloud. Not real. Just memory. Please help me. A whisper designed to bypass reason. A voice that sounded just helpless enough to trigger something inside me. The kind of thing you think you'd never fall for until it's your door they're knocking on. I never heard from the police again. I doubt they found anything. If someone was out there that night, they vanished before they left a trace. Or maybe they didn't vanish. Maybe they live here. Maybe they're still waiting for someone else to forget to check. I'm different now. I triple lock my door. I check every window. I leave no curtains open. I never wear headphones when I'm home alone. I don't care if it's the middle of the day. If someone knocks, I wait. I listen. And if I ever hear that voice again, I'll know. This time, I won't even move. I used to be an EMT and firefighter, stationed in a quiet town that pretended nothing bad ever happened there. But anyone who's worked in emergency services knows the calmest towns carry the weirdest calls. I've seen my share of tragedies and strange stories, but one night in particular has always stayed with me. It wasn't the worst or the bloodiest or even the most dangerous, but it's the one that felt wrong. The one that scratched at the back of my mind long after the reports were filed and the scene was cleared. It started as a routine call, a wellness check. Someone had dialed 911 and hung up without saying anything. The dispatcher tried calling back. No answer. Protocol dictated a response, and we were the closest unit, so we went. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, tucked behind old trees with limbs heavy enough to hide the roof. White picket fence, trimmed hedges, clean windows. It looked like a postcard. A place where nothing bad ever happened. But I've learned to distrust appearances, especially the quiet ones. We knocked. An older woman answered. Mid to late 70s, small frame, silver hair pinned up neatly, wearing a pink cardigan like it was Sunday morning instead of close to midnight. Her eyes were kind, but tired. We introduced ourselves and asked if she had made the 911 call. She looked confused and shook her head, said she lived alone and hadn't touched the phone. Her voice didn't waver. No signs of dementia or confusion. She didn't seem like the kind of person who would misdial. We asked if anyone else had been by recently. Family, neighbors, visitors. She said no. She hadn't had company in days. She mentioned her husband had passed several years ago. Since then, she'd kept to herself. She smiled when she said it, but there was something hollow behind it, something practiced, a smile that had been put on too many times. We asked if we could come inside, just to be sure everything was okay. She agreed. The house was exactly what you'd expect. Clean, quiet, filled with the sort of furniture that was made to last generations. Family photos lined the hallway. There was a faint smell of lavender, like the whole place had been sealed in time. We checked the rooms. No signs of distress, no sounds, no movement. Nothing to explain the call. We thanked her for her time and stepped outside, radioed in the update, and drove back to the station. Not even 30 minutes later, the call came in again. Same house, same situation. 911 hang up. No response to callbacks. It could have been a technical glitch, a short in the phone line, interference. But we had to go back. So we did. She answered again. Same sweater, same face, same calm demeanor. This time, she looked more concerned, as if we might think she was playing games. She swore she hadn't used the phone. She offered to let us check it, and we did. Landline. Nothing unusual. But something about the static on the line made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't loud, just present, like something breathing through the wires. We left again, told her not to worry. But this time, as we pulled away, something gnawed at the back of my skull. I remember looking at the house in the rearview mirror, watching the windows, wondering if someone else was watching us. Back at the station, we joked about it. Maybe the house was haunted. Maybe the phone had a ghost. That's what we do, make light of things we don't understand. But then the call came in again. Same house. Third time. No answer. No voice. Just the sound of silence. The dispatcher was confused, and frankly, so were we. At this point, we thought maybe there was a fault in the system, a crossed wire somewhere. We drove out for the third time, tired, curious, a little more serious now. But when we arrived, everything was different. The house was dark, no porch light, no glow from inside. The first two times she'd been at the door before we could knock. This time, we rang the bell, waited, knocked, nothing. The door was unlocked. We hesitated. It's not normal to just walk into someone's house, even on a wellness check. But something felt off. I felt it in my gut, the way you do before a structure collapse or a cardiac arrest call you know will end badly. That sensation you can't put words to, but every responder knows. We stepped inside, lights from our flashlights carving shapes into the shadows. And there she was, on the floor of the living room, still, unmoving. We rushed to her, checked for a pulse. Weak, but present. She was breathing, barely, cold to the touch. We radioed for backup, started administering oxygen, checking vitals, doing what we could. As we worked, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at us, but it was like she wasn't seeing us. Her mouth moved, trying to speak, but the words weren't coming. Finally, she whispered that she didn't understand. She said, once again, that she never called. We didn't argue. We just kept her stable, loaded her into the rig, and drove her to the hospital. She survived, stabilized, got treatment. And later, after she'd regained her strength, she asked for us. She said she had a favor. She wanted someone to go back to her house and retrieve a few things, her knitting needles, and a small overnight bag. She even gave us directions to exactly where the items were. I volunteered. The place wasn't far from my route home, and I figured I'd just swing by, grab the bag, and head out. My friend, another EMT, was with me. He waited in the car while I went inside. The house felt colder than I remembered. The air had that thick, unmoving quality that old houses sometimes get when no one's around. I grabbed her things quickly, wanting to be in and out. But as I stepped into the hallway, heading back toward the door, I felt something behind me. Not a touch, just the pressure of a presence. The way the air shifted, the way the silence changed. I turned slightly, and in that moment, I swear I heard it. A voice, soft, right behind my ear. "Thank you." I didn't freeze. I didn't panic. I just walked a little faster and stepped back outside into the daylight. When I got into the car, my friend looked pale. He asked, casually, "Hey, did the woman's husband live with her?" I said no, that he'd passed years ago. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Because while you were in there, I saw a man in the front window. He looked right at me and waved." I didn't respond, just started the car. Later that night, I called the police, told them someone might have been squatting in the house. They did a sweep, found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing disturbing. We visited the woman again, brought her the bag, sat with her for a while. My friend described the man he saw. Her hand shook. She looked down and said, quietly, "That's my Harold." She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. Just nodded and said it again. That's him. We never figured out where the calls came from. There was no record of any outbound calls from her landline. No indication it had even been used that night. No malfunctions. No crossed lines. And yet something had summoned us. 3 times. And every time, it had been just in time. I don't pretend to understand what happened that week. I've seen people die, and I've seen people survive when they shouldn't. But this wasn't luck. This wasn't timing. It was something else. Something grateful. Something watching. And to this day, I still hear that voice when I think about her house. That quiet, final whisper. "Thank you." I was 17 when it happened, and I had never truly known fear before that night. I was always the girl who walked home alone from the train late at night. Earbuds in, music turned up, convinced I was untouchable. I lived in a Brooklyn brownstone with my family, the kind of place where everything felt familiar, where the stairs creaked the same way every time, and the street outside always smelled faintly like hot asphalt, no matter the season. It was summer, and I remember the night clearly, too clearly, the kind of memory that never fades, no matter how many years pass. That night had started out like any other. I had gone to a late movie in Manhattan with friends, laughed too loud in the theater, snuck sips of something strong out of a plastic water bottle, and pretended like most teenagers do that I was older than I was. I was in a good mood, carefree, even excited to be heading home alone, enjoying the warm breeze and the rhythm of the city as it started to settle into sleep. I had a midnight curfew, but I never stuck to it. I was always a few minutes late. My parents didn't push too hard. I got off the train and started walking the 10 or so minutes to my house. I was wearing something bold that night. A tight dress and this long, sheer cape that fluttered behind me with every step. I felt confident in it, maybe too confident. I had my headphones in, music loud, taking selfies under the orange glow of the streetlights, swaying slightly as I walked, half drunk, half dreaming. I wasn't watching my surroundings. I wasn't thinking about danger. When I turned onto my block, everything was quiet. The sidewalks were empty. The street was still. I remember thinking how rare that was, even at night. I climbed the brownstone steps like I always did, humming to myself, still in my own world. I lived on the 3rd floor in an apartment that shared a narrow entrance with 2 others. At the base of the steps, there was a black wrought iron gate that separated the stoop from the sidewalk. I fumbled for my keys, standing in front of our heavy wooden front door, already picturing my bed, the cool sheets, maybe sneaking into the kitchen for a snack before collapsing. Then I heard the latch on the gate, a metallic click. I turned around slowly, expecting to see a neighbor, maybe someone walking their dog, someone who had a reason to be coming through that gate. But what I saw made the breath leave my lungs. There was a man standing just inside the gate, staring straight up at me. He was young, maybe in his 20s, but there was nothing youthful about him. He wore a gray hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. His features were barely visible in the low light, but his eyes were sharp and hollow at the same time. One hand still rested on the gate, like he hadn't decided yet whether to come closer. The other hand was low near his waist, moving rapidly. That's when I saw what he was doing. He was touching himself. Brazen, focused, not embarrassed. Just watching me. And then, without warning, he started to move. Fast. He sprinted up the stairs, closing the distance between us in seconds. I dropped my keys, panic exploding in my chest like a gunshot. I started screaming. I don't even remember what I yelled, just raw, desperate noise. My hands found the doorknob, fumbling, slipping. Somehow, I got the door open and slammed it behind me. I didn't stop. I ran up the narrow stairwell, screaming for my dad, screaming like I was already being dragged backward. As I ran, I turned just once. He was at the door. His face was pressed up against the glass pane of the entry window, watching me. His mouth was twisted in something between a grin and a snarl. His eyes were wide, locked onto mine. And then, without a word, he turned and ran. By the time I reached our apartment, my dad was already at the door, half awake and confused. Our dogs barking like they sensed something too. I could barely speak. Just kept repeating what happened over and over, trying to make it real by saying it aloud. My mom called the police while my dad ran downstairs, but the man was long gone. When the officers arrived, I gave them a description. They said they'd patrol the neighborhood, maybe try to check footage from some of the local storefronts, but they didn't seem hopeful. They told me a detective might follow up. No one ever did. That summer, our neighborhood was already on edge. Assaults had been happening more often. Women followed. A few attacked. We all read about it, nodded solemnly, but deep down most of us believed it wouldn't happen to us. Until it did. I couldn't stop thinking about how long he had followed me. How close he must have been for how quickly he got up those stairs. Did he see me on the train? Did he wait until I left the station? Had he followed me for blocks, watching, waiting? I never went home alone after that. For the last few weeks before I left for college, my dad would meet me at the train station and walk me the few blocks to our door. I stopped wearing headphones in public. I stopped walking with my head down. I stopped assuming I was safe. But the worst part, the part one can't forget, is that if I hadn't taken my headphones out right before I started unlocking the door, I never would have heard the gate. I would have never known he was there. I would have opened the door, stepped inside, and left it unlocked. And I don't know what would have happened then. I think about the way he looked at me. The complete lack of hesitation in his movements. The strange focus. He didn't seem nervous or panicked. It felt practiced. It felt deliberate. He knew exactly how to get in, how to chase, how to silence. To this day, I can't listen to music with both earbuds in when I'm walking. I always check behind me when I climb stairs. I always keep my keys in hand long before I reach the door, because danger doesn't always announce itself with shouting or chaos. Sometimes it waits until you're at your most distracted. When you're happy, carefree, celebrating nothing in particular. And then it strikes. I never found out who he was. No one did. But I see his face in my dreams sometimes. Not angry, not wild, just staring, waiting. I was working a night shift when the call came in. It was flagged as a mental health check, nothing urgent. Just one of those routine calls where a family member wants someone to make sure their loved one isn't spiraling. I'd done dozens before. Most were uneventful. Someone crying, someone ranting. Usually ended with a chat and a note in the log. This one didn't feel different at first. I pulled up to the address. An older house tucked away in a residential area that clearly hadn't seen much renovation since the 70s. The porch light was flickering weakly, casting uneven shadows across the cracked walkway. I checked my gear, locked the cruiser, and headed up the front steps. The mother answered before I knocked, like she'd been standing just behind the door. She was in her 50s, maybe a little older, eyes ringed with exhaustion and something else. Something like fear, but quieter. She told me her son had been acting strange for the past 2 days. Said he was using again, though she didn't know what. She said he'd been rambling about a man in his room. Not just seeing someone, but refusing to go inside because, in his words, he's still there. She thought it was just the drugs, maybe something laced, maybe a psychotic break. Either way, she was scared. Not just of what he might do, but because she hadn't gone in that room herself, not since he started talking like that. I asked if she could show me where he was. She stepped aside and pointed toward the back of the house. Her son was sitting on the edge of a couch, eyes wide, twitchy, fingers tapping his knee in some invisible rhythm. He looked up at me like he expected me, like he knew help was supposed to arrive, but wasn't sure I could actually help. He said he couldn't go into his room, that there was a man hanging in there, that the man wore a full dress uniform, like he was still waiting for a ceremony that never happened. I asked if he was certain of what he saw. He just nodded. He looked terrified, not strung out, not hallucinating, just terrified, in a way that didn't match the usual. I told him I'd check it out. He didn't stop me. He didn't argue. He just looked away, started muttering to himself, like he was already retreating from the moment. The hallway was narrow, old wood under my boots, dust in the corners. One of those houses where every step has an echo, where time feels thick. The door to his room was halfway open. I pushed it gently, letting it swing. It was a typical bedroom. Bed unmade, clothes in a heap, a few posters on the wall, peeling at the corners. One window, curtain drawn. I scanned the ceiling. Nothing. I stepped in. No one hanging. No strange figures. No signs of anything beyond a young guy who hadn't cleaned up in weeks. I walked a slow circle. No drafts. No odd smells. No shadow figures or ghostly impressions burned into the wall. Just silence. I turned back and told his mother that the room was clear. She seemed relieved, but not surprised. Like she had expected me to say that, but it didn't settle anything for her. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Another unit arrived just as I was wrapping up. A veteran officer, guy I'd worked with before. He asked me how it went, and I gave him the short version. Another drug-induced episode. Nothing in the room. No signs of harm. He looked over my shoulder, toward the hallway, then pulled me aside. "I've been here before," he said. I asked when. "Years ago," he said. "Same room. Guy hanged himself. World War II vet. Full uniform." I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. He said he didn't remember the exact date, but he'd never forgotten the scene. The man had been found by a neighbor after no one heard from him for days. They said he dressed carefully. Boots shined, medals pinned, everything perfect. Like he was waiting for someone, or something. I didn't say anything right away, just stared at the hallway. After he left, I went back to my cruiser. I pulled up the incident log from past decades and searched the address. It took some time, but I found it. A single incident report from over 20 years ago. Suicide. Male, age 78. Former military. Cause of death, hanging. Discovered in the back bedroom. Same room, same door. I sat there in silence, rereading the report, like the details might change if I blinked hard enough. Then I started wondering, did the son know? Had his mother told him? It seemed unlikely. She acted like it was all new to her. Just another episode in a long string of drug-induced paranoia. But what if it wasn't? What if he saw something? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what he said, the way he said it. He hadn't described a shadow, or a ghost, or a dark figure. He described a man, in uniform, hanging from the ceiling. Exactly what happened in that room, and I couldn't shake the image. Not of the ghost, but of the son, sitting on the couch, trembling, retreating inward like he had seen something that unmade the world around him. Like he'd glimpsed something that didn't belong in ours. I went back the next day. I told myself it was just to check in, to follow up. But the mother said her son had left that morning. Walked out with nothing but a backpack. Didn't say where he was going. She hadn't heard from him since. I asked her again if she knew anything about the history of the house. She said no. When they bought it, it had been empty for years. She thought it had just been neglected, like many older homes. The realtor never mentioned anything. No disclosure. No warning. And maybe that was true. Or maybe the memory of that man, the soldier, was never meant to stay buried. Maybe the room remembered. And maybe her son wasn't the first to see him. I still think about that place sometimes. About the strange quiet in that room. The way the air felt heavy even though the window was open. The way the light didn't quite reach the corners. And I wonder how many people lived there between the time the soldier died and now. Did they feel it too? Did they sense something was off, but never knew why? Or maybe they never went in the room at night. Maybe that was the unspoken rule. Leave it alone. Let it hang in silence. And maybe, just maybe, that soldier was still standing there, in some impossible reflection of time, waiting for a funeral that never came. I was 19 when it happened. A sophomore in college, just beginning to settle into the rhythm of campus life, and still foolish enough to believe I had control over my own safety. I lived in student housing just off the main part of campus, a suite-style building connected to a multi-level parking garage. There were 5 floors to the garage, with the top level on street grade and the rest sloping downward into darker and more forgotten territory. I usually parked on the top floor because I hated being inside the structure. The echo of footsteps, the strange shadows, the dim lighting. Something about it always made me uneasy. I was in a relationship at the time, and my boyfriend lived in a town about 30 minutes away. I spent most of my time at his place, trying to escape the chaos and noise of campus. My suite was fine, clean and modern enough, but I didn't like being there alone. That semester, I had an 8M biology class, which meant I often came back to campus late at night after spending the day and evening off campus. I'd return in the early hours, park, walk the long sidewalk from the garage to the suite building, swipe my ID at the door, and collapse into bed. I had a routine. That's what made what happened feel so wrong. It was a Thursday night, and I got back around 2 May. Remember, it was unusually dark. No moon, no stars. Just a heavy kind of black that swallowed the tops of the trees and turned the street lamps into faint smudges. The garage was mostly full, which surprised me. I had to park all the way at the far end, near the ramp that led down into the lower levels. I didn't think much of it. I grabbed my bag, locked the car, and started walking the familiar path toward the suite entrance. To get there, you had to walk past the small glass elevator room. It was a little structure with wide windows on all sides and a single elevator inside. It sat at the edge of the garage, like an afterthought, the only vertical option for students who didn't want to take the stairs. As I got closer to it, I noticed something strange. Someone was inside, not riding the elevator, just standing behind the glass. It was a man, middle-aged, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, half concealed by the angle of the wall. I knew right away that he hadn't just come out of the elevator. The doors never opened. I had a clear view, and I'd been watching since I stepped out of my car. He was already there, waiting. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a lost parent, a janitor, someone who had business there. But something about his posture was off. Too still, too focused. Like he was trying not to be noticed, but also making no attempt to move or leave. I passed the elevator room without slowing down, keeping my head forward, but my eyes on him in my peripheral vision. As I reached the sidewalk that led to the suite building, I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. His. He had left the elevator room and was now walking behind me. Not quickly, not running, but matching my pace. Just far enough behind that I couldn't see him unless I turned around. And I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct, I had screamed not to. Just keep walking. Get to the building. Get inside. I quickened my pace. So did he. I could hear the sound of shoes on concrete. Not loud, but steady. Deliberate. I passed the first emergency call post. One of those tall poles with the blue light and button to contact campus police. But I didn't stop. Some part of me, deep and old and animal, told me not to show fear. Not to let him know I knew. Seconds passed like hours. The sidewalk stretched longer than I remembered. My palms were sweating. My heart was thudding so loud it made my ears ring. I could see the suite entrance now. 3 doors. I always used the third one. It led closest to my room. But tonight, I made a snap decision. I went for the first one. The closest. I pulled out my student ID and had it ready in my hand before I even reached the scanner. I heard his pace change. He was moving faster. I swiped. The door clicked. I yanked it open, stepped inside, and slammed it behind me with every ounce of force I had. I turned and looked through the narrow vertical window beside the door. He was there, less than 5 feet away. We locked eyes for just a second. That was all. He didn't look angry, or even surprised. He looked curious, like he hadn't decided what to do next. Then he turned and walked away. No rush. Just vanished into the shadows around the side of the building. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream. I just stood there, trying to understand what had almost happened. The next morning, I woke up to an email from campus security. It said a suspicious person had been reported near the parking garage. Several students had noticed someone lurking around the elevator and the lower levels. A man who didn't seem to belong. They were increasing patrols, they said, reminding us to walk in groups, to stay alert. But they didn't catch him. They never did. I never saw him again. But that night changed everything. I don't use headphones when I walk alone anymore. I never park far away from exits. I check my surroundings constantly. I don't assume that well-lit places are safe. Because I know now, sometimes the danger doesn't come running. Sometimes it walks behind you. Slow, patient, waiting for you to choose the wrong door. There's a version of this story I used to tell myself. That I was just paranoid. That I overreacted. That I got in my own head after a few weird coincidences and made something up that wasn't there. But that's not the real story. Not the full one. And definitely not the one my instincts remember. Because no matter how many times I try to rationalize what happened that night, there's a part of me that knows I was supposed to disappear. It started in the middle of a stretch of strange things. Break-ins in my building. Stuff going missing. Doors I was sure I'd locked ending up cracked open in the morning. I didn't live in a great area, and my building was mostly quiet, tucked between businesses that closed early and an old fire escape that rattled in the wind. I lived with one roommate who worked nights, and I often came home alone to an empty place. I got paranoid enough to install cameras. Little ones, discreet, with motion detection. I put them near every door and window. I kept the footage saved to a drive I hid behind a loose tile in the kitchen. I didn't tell anyone, not even my roommate. I just needed to know in case it happened again. And it did. More than once, The cameras caught weird shadows, movement near the windows when no one was supposed to be there. I'd hear things, soft creaks, quiet steps, the unmistakable shift of weight on the floorboards, but nothing was ever taken. It was like someone just looked around. One night, after I'd come home from a long shift, I was half drunk and scrolling on my phone when I matched with someone on Tinder. Her name was Amanda. She was stunning, model-type photos, bright smile, messy bun, glass of wine in her hand. Her bio was casual, and she messaged first. She was confident, flirty. I should have known right then it was too good to be true. She told me she lived nearby. Like, really nearby. 5 minutes walking distance. She sent her location. I checked. It was a building I'd walked past 1,000 times. She said she was high, wanted to smoke, hang out, relax. I was skeptical. Something about it felt off. I told her to video call me, and she did. That caught me off guard. I expected a fake profile, maybe a sketchy guy behind the photos. But the face on the screen matched the one in her pictures. She smiled, played with her hair, told me to come over. So I did. It was late, almost 1 a.m., but the streets were still alive in that way cities never truly sleep. I didn't bring much, a bottle, some snacks, and a whole lot of hesitation. I walked to the address she gave me, staring up at the building. It was older, 3 floors, brick front, narrow windows. Looked normal. As I approached the front, I caught sight of a figure in the alleyway beside the building. A man, tall, maybe 6'2" or taller. He was standing just inside the mouth of the alley, half hidden in shadow, pretending to be on his phone. But it was the kind of pretending you notice when someone's not really typing, just tapping the screen to look occupied. I walked past him, trying to act like I didn't see, but I slowed my pace. I wanted to see what he'd do. He didn't follow. Not yet. Then, from behind me, a voice called out. It was her, Amanda. She was real. In a hoodie now, hair down, makeup smudged. She waved me in, told me to follow her. I tried to shake the unease from my spine, told myself I was being ridiculous. I followed her up the stairs toward the front door, except she didn't go to the main entrance. She veered to the side, toward a short staircase that led down into a basement unit. I paused. She laughed, told me not to worry, said her apartment was private, cozy. I followed, telling myself again that this was fine, but my instincts had already started screaming. We entered through a door that opened directly into the living room. It was dimly lit, sparsely decorated. A couch, a table, a few shelves. Nothing on the walls. No photos. No clutter. No personality. It didn't look like a place anyone actually lived. I asked her about it. She brushed it off, said she had just moved in. I sat down on the couch. She poured drinks. She sat next to me, started kissing me almost immediately. Her hands moved fast, guiding mine, trying to get me to relax, trying to take off my watch, my jacket. I kissed her back, but something wasn't right. There was a door in the back corner of the room, closed, but I could see water pooling slightly beneath it. Not fresh, but like something had overflowed hours ago. Stale. I asked her about it. She didn't answer the question. Just grabbed the water bottle off the table and said, "Yeah, I've got water right here." That was when I really started to panic. Not because of what she said, but because I heard movement from behind that closed door. The sound of footsteps on carpet. Slow, deliberate. Like someone shifting their weight from one foot to the other, trying to stay quiet, trying not to be heard. I stood up, told her I needed to use the bathroom. She pointed toward the hallway, distracted, already on her phone again. I pretended to leave the room, but doubled back toward the front door. I reached for the handle. Locked. Deadbolt. I turned slowly, trying not to make a sound. She was still sitting on the couch, watching me now. Not smiling, not speaking, just waiting. I fumbled with my phone and opened the audio recorder. I hit record and started talking loud, like I was leaving a message. Hey, I'm at 223 Front Street, basement unit. Just hanging out. Let me know when you're here. Her face changed, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. I added, yeah, if I'm not out in 10 minutes, knock. Door's locked. Call the cops if I don't answer. She stood up, asked me what I was doing. I didn't answer. I stared her down, reached for the lock, and turned it. This time, it opened. No chain, no second lock. I left fast, not running, but fast enough to make it clear I wasn't staying. She didn't follow, but I didn't go straight home. I walked around the block, watching the alley. That man was still there, but now he was standing at the end of the building, watching the side entrance, like he'd been waiting for a signal. Waiting for a signal. I ducked behind a car, pulled out my phone, and texted my roommate, telling him to call the police. Then I went home. I checked my cameras. Nothing had triggered them, but someone had moved a chair inside, slightly, a shift I hadn't noticed earlier. I never heard from Amanda again. Her Tinder profile vanished. Her number stopped working. I never filed a report, never told the police, because I didn't have evidence. Just instinct, just fear. But I know what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd let my guard down, if I hadn't listened to that voice inside me telling me to run. This story doesn't belong to me, but I know it well. It happened to my brother's girlfriend during her sophomore year of college. When she first told me, her voice shook. Not from the memory of fear, but from the realization of how close she'd come to something she couldn't explain. Something she still doesn't fully understand. She lived off campus in one of those old row houses that get converted into student housing. There were 5 girls sharing it, all around the same age. Sophomores, newly independent, wide-eyed, and naive in the way that makes you think locking the front door is enough. The place had 3 floors and a basement. The landlord had padlocked the basement and told them not to worry about it, that it was storage, inaccessible. None of them questioned it. The house was in a rough part of the city. That wasn't unusual. The rent was cheap, and the location was close enough to campus to be convenient. She worked odd hours as a CN at a hospital downtown. Her shifts were brutal, and she often got home late, long after the rest of the house had gone to bed. At first, it was little things. Missing snacks, empty wrappers left on the counter, dishes in the sink that no one claimed. The usual drama of a crowded house. Everyone suspected someone else. Jokes were made. Annoyed group texts were sent. But it was all still in the realm of normal. She figured one of the girls had a boyfriend sneaking food, or someone just forgot what they ate. But then it kept happening. More food vanished. Bags of chips half-eaten and shoved behind bookshelves. Utensils gone, then reappearing in weird places. Pans left on the stove she knew she hadn't touched. Still, they brushed it off. People were tired, stoned, distracted. College life was chaotic. Things get misplaced. Until one night, she got home later than usual. Her shift had run long. It was nearly 1 a.m. when she stepped through the front door. The stairs were directly in front of her, and from there, you could see straight down the side of the house into the kitchen. As she walked in, she noticed someone standing by the fridge. A silhouette, half lit by the glow of the refrigerator light. Tall, slightly hunched, moving slowly. She didn't stop to say hello. She assumed it was one of her roommates, maybe drunk, maybe raiding the fridge half asleep, and she was too tired to get into a conversation. So she walked right past and went upstairs. But as she climbed the stairs, something tugged at her gut. All the bedroom doors were closed and dark. None of the girls left their lights off when they were awake. Not at that hour. It hit her slowly. Whoever was downstairs wasn't supposed to be. Her heart pounded in her ears. She froze in the hallway, then quickly and silently stepped into her roommate's room. Thankfully, it was unlocked. She shook her awake, whispering as quietly as she could, "Someone's in the house." Her roommate's eyes went wide. They both sat in the dark, listening. But they heard nothing. No movement, no creaking, no doors opening or closing. Just silence. She began to wonder if she'd imagined it. Maybe it had been one of the girls. Maybe someone had gotten up and gone back to bed already. She wanted to believe that. She almost convinced herself of it. But something still didn't feel right. She grabbed her phone, opened the group chat, and asked, "Is anyone downstairs right now?" Only 2 girls replied. Both said no. The other 2 were asleep. That was when she called 911. The dispatcher answered quickly. She explained the situation as calmly as she could, that she'd seen someone in the kitchen, that no one in the house had claimed to be awake. She stayed on the line as the minutes crawled past. When the officers arrived, they identified themselves at the front door. She peeked through the upstairs window and saw them, real uniforms, real badges. She opened the door and let them inside. They did a sweep of the house. Every room, every closet, nothing. The back door was locked. The windows were locked. There was no sign of forced entry. No footprints in the backyard snow. Just a house full of confused, frightened girls and a lot of unanswered questions. Then the police asked about the basement. The girls looked at each other. The landlord had told them it was off limits, that it was padlocked and used for storage. But now, that seemed like a lazy excuse. The officers went to check. The door was shut, the padlock hanging from the latch. But when one of them tested it, it pulled away easily. The screws holding the latch had been carefully removed and replaced. Not broken, not forced, just unhooked. They opened the basement door and went down. That was when they found it. A mattress, thin, stained, tucked in the far corner of the basement. A pile of clothes, half-empty food containers. A plastic bucket in the corner, used as a toilet. A stolen comforter from their hallway closet. Someone had been living down there for weeks, maybe months. Had been creeping up at night, stealing food, walking the same floors they thought were safe, watching, listening, waiting. They called in backup, took fingerprints. The girls were told to stay elsewhere for a few days while the investigation unfolded. She stayed with a friend, shaking, unable to sleep, thinking about every night she'd come home late, every time she'd walk through the dark hallway, every time she'd heard a noise and shrugged it off. The man was never caught. The landlord claimed he had no idea anyone had gotten into the basement. The lock had been untouched on the outside, but someone had unscrewed the latch from inside, quietly, with patience and planning. The scariest part? They never figured out how he got in to begin with. No broken windows, no missing keys, no signs of forced entry. It was like he'd always been there. She moved out a month later, but even now, years later, she still double-checks every closet before going to bed. Still locks her bedroom door, even when she lives alone. Still listens for the soft sounds of movement in the walls. Because you can live with someone, eat with them, sleep just feet away from them, and never know they're there. Until it's too late. I live in a quiet house in a suburban neighborhood just outside Salt Lake City. The kind of place where nothing exciting happens. You mow the lawn on Saturdays, wave to neighbors who never make eye contact, and assume that if something goes wrong, it happens somewhere else. I've lived here for 4 years now, and I've never had a reason to feel unsafe. Until recently. My house has a crawl space. A large one, oddly big for a property like this. It runs beneath the entire foundation, accessible only through a single door on the outside, just below my bedroom window and to the right of the back deck steps. It's deep, tall enough for a grown man to stand in. The floor is dirt, The walls, thick concrete. It used to be cluttered with junk left over from renovations, but a few months ago, I had it cleared out by the yard guy. He hauled everything out, and I didn't think much of it after that. I never went down there, never needed to. There had been a lock on the door, a padlock on a rusty metal latch. Nothing special. After the cleanup, I didn't bother replacing the lock. I figured the bolt was enough. The door closed tightly. It wasn't worth worrying about. We live in a safe area, I told myself. Who would want to go into a dirty crawl space? That was my mistake. The first time something strange happened, my boyfriend was taking out the recycling late one night. He walked past the crawl space and noticed the door wasn't flush against the frame. He stepped closer and realized it was open just a crack, maybe an inch, maybe two, but enough that it caught his attention. He asked me about it when he came back inside. I told him I hadn't touched it. We shrugged it off. Probably the wind. Or maybe the bolt didn't catch fully when the yard guy closed it. We checked it the next day. It looked fine. No damage. No signs of forced entry. Still, something about it stuck with me. That door was heavy. It didn't swing open on its own. I remember standing there, staring at it, and feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air. A week later, it happened again. This time, I noticed it. I let the dog out one afternoon, and he sprinted straight to the crawlspace door. He sniffed at the bottom, pawed at the edges, then started whining, low and sharp, the kind of sound that made the hair on my neck rise. When I looked closer, I saw it was ajar again, same as before, just a crack. Just enough to suggest it hadn't been shut completely. I opened it, nothing inside. Just the smell of cold earth and the lingering scent of old wood. I knelt and looked around, flashlight in hand. The crawlspace was empty, silent. But that didn't make me feel better, because the bolt had definitely been slid into place the last time. I remembered doing it myself. And now, somehow, it wasn't. Still, I didn't panic. Told myself it was loose. Told myself I'd install a new padlock when I had the time. That was all. No reason to assume anything more. Until the third time. It was late afternoon, a couple weeks later. I was home alone, stretched out on the bed with a book. The dog was pacing, restless. Normally he'd be curled up beside me, dozing. But today, he was agitated. His ears kept perking up. He stared at the bedroom window, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then I heard it. A creaking sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even immediate. It was the kind of slow, grinding creak that made you think of something heavy being opened. Like wood dragging against wood. Like a door. I knew that sound. I'd heard it when I first opened the crawlspace myself. It was right below my window. I didn't move for a second. I just sat there, the book still in my lap, staring at the floor like I could see through it. My heart started to pound. I stood up slowly, crept to the window, and tilted the blind just enough to peek outside. That's when I saw him. A man. Tall, wearing a faded hoodie. Head down. Just now reaching the top of the steps that led from the crawlspace to the deck. He was walking toward the back door. Like he belonged there. Like he had just finished a cigarette and was heading inside. I froze. He didn't look around. He didn't knock. He didn't run. He just walked. I dropped the blind and moved toward the hallway. The dog exploded in barking. He was at the front door in an instant, claws scrambling on the floor, snarling. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911 with shaking fingers, and locked myself in the bathroom. The dispatcher kept me calm, stayed on the line while I listened for sounds from the house. But there was nothing. No door opening, no footsteps, just silence. When the police arrived, they searched the house. Nothing was missing, nothing broken. The crawlspace door was wide open. The bolt had been slid aside, again. No lock, no signs of struggle, just access. Afterward, I tried to explain it away. Maybe he was a squatter. Maybe someone had been using the crawl space for shelter. But how would they know when I was home alone? Why try to come up into the house in the middle of the day? And why didn't he run when he knew I saw him? My boyfriend put a padlock on the door that same night. A new, heavy one. He also took the gun out of the safe and loaded it with rat shot. He made me promise to keep it near the bed when I was alone. I argued at first. I didn't want to go there. But something in his face, something pale and shaken, made me agree. The next few days passed quietly, but the crawl space never left my mind, because I knew he'd been in there. Not just once, more than once. Maybe even while we were sleeping. And the idea that someone could be that close, beneath the floor, just one layer of wood and air away, is a kind of fear that sticks in your bones. I don't sleep as well now. I still hear things. Thumps, creaks, shifts. I tell myself it's the house settling. I check the lock every night. I keep the dog nearby. I pretend I'm fine. But every now and then, I dream that I forget to check the bolt. And in the dream, I hear the door creak open again. And this time, he comes all the way inside. It happened when I was 17, sometime near the end of my junior year. School had just wrapped up, and summer was right around the corner. I had finished my last big project, closed my laptop, and sat there thinking about what to do next. With the rush of school out of the way, I had this weird leftover motivation still buzzing through me. I didn't want to waste it. So, I figured I'd make some cash instead. I grabbed my keys and started driving around town to deliver food through one of those apps. The deliveries were easy enough. I cruised from restaurant to restaurant, then straight to the houses. I drop off the bags, snap a picture, and hit complete. I probably did it for 2, maybe 3 hours. It was getting dark. Most places were shutting down for the night. I was tired, but just as I was about to wrap things up, a notification popped up on my screen. One last delivery. The address wasn't far, but it was in a part of town I never liked driving through. Not dangerous really, but something about it always made me uncomfortable. A weird mix of rundown homes and strange silence. Still, I didn't want to end the night on a declined order. So I tapped accept, picked up the food, and drove over. The house was small and single-story, sitting alone on a cracked patch of driveway. Paint chipped off the walls. The windows looked dim and heavy, and there was this overgrown patch of grass out front that hadn't been touched in weeks. Still, it was just a job. I got out, set the bag on the porch as instructed, took a quick photo, and turned to leave. Then I heard the door click open behind me. A tall, thin man stepped out. He was wearing this massive, oversized jacket that nearly swallowed him. That caught me off guard because it was a hot, sticky Florida evening. The kind of night that made your skin feel like it couldn't breathe. The jacket looked out of place, like he didn't belong in this weather, or maybe didn't belong here at all. I gave him a quick nod and told him to enjoy his meal. But then he said, "Wait, I have something for you." I paused. He smiled, motioned toward the open door, and said something about a surprise. He wanted me to come inside. I looked past him. The house was dimly lit. I could only see a narrow hallway, partly hidden by shadows, and what little I could see looked cluttered, off, somehow wrong. I told him politely that I had to get going, but he kept insisting it would only take a second. Eventually, when he realized I wasn't coming in, he nodded and slipped back inside. I turned to go, but then he came back out holding a white box. He handed it to me, saying it was homemade cookies, that he gave all his delivery drivers a little treat. He told me he used his grandmother's recipe, that she used to run a famous business and made these cookies by the thousands. I didn't ask for details. I just thanked him, got in my car, and drove home. The box sat on my bed when I got back. I was sweaty, gross from being out all evening, and too tired to care about the cookies. I figured I'd try one the next day, so I left the box as it was and headed to take a shower. 10 minutes later, I heard my mom yelling. Her voice wasn't angry. It was panicked, confused. She kept calling my name. I shut off the water, grabbed a towel, and ran into my room. That's when I saw what she saw. My cat. She was on my bed, right next to the open cookie box. She'd ripped it apart. Cookies everywhere. Crumbs stuck to her fur. She was breathing heavily, too fast, her eyes half closed. She looked like she was about to die right there in front of me. My mom and I didn't waste a second. We wrapped her in a towel and bolted to the car. The nearest emergency vet was almost 20 minutes away, but we pushed it, cutting lights, blowing through quiet intersections. I didn't say a word during that drive. My heart wouldn't stop pounding. When we got there, a tech took her in immediately. They ran tests while we waited, telling us it would only be a few minutes. Every second that passed felt like hours. My mom was gripping her phone like it was a lifeline. Then finally, the vet came out. He was holding her. She looked better. Exhausted, but better. He told us they found a chemical in her system called brodifacoum, a strong anticoagulant. Basically, a super potent rat poison. It messes with the blood. Internal bleeding. Quick death in most animals. She had eaten cookies laced with it. That man had given me poisoned food. The vet told us if we had arrived 10 minutes later, she probably would have bled out from the inside. They had pumped her stomach, flushed her system, and she was lucky. Unbelievably lucky. Most animals don't survive that kind of exposure. We called the police that same night. I gave them the address, every detail I could remember. But when they went to the house, it was empty. No lights, no signs of anyone living there. The door was unlocked, and inside, they said it looked like no one had been there for weeks. Nothing matched up. No trace of the man, no sign of the jacket. No box like the one I was given. They opened the case, tried to track him down, but after a week, they called it off. He had disappeared. Like a shadow that just slipped into the cracks. We kept the cookie box. I handed it over to them for testing. They confirmed it. The whole batch had been soaked with that poison. If I had eaten just one, I might not be here. Sometimes I think about it too much. Like, what if I had eaten them before my shower? What if the box hadn't been on the bed? What if my cat hadn't gotten to them first? That man knew someone would eat them. He gave them to me for that reason. It wasn't kindness. It was something much darker. The house, the jacket, the way he lured me toward the door. I think the cookies were plan B. Maybe if I had stepped inside, things would have gone differently. Maybe worse. We don't talk about it much anymore, but my cat still flinches at food boxes. I don't deliver in that part of town. And I never take anything from strangers again, no matter how friendly they seem. Some people don't want to hurt you for a reason. They just want to hurt someone. Anyone. That night, I came close to being that someone. And sometimes, even now, I lie in bed and wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another driver to pull up, another kid to hand a gift to, another pet to save a life without ever knowing it. This happened a couple of years ago, on a day that should have been completely uneventful. It was sometime around mid-afternoon, one of those quiet, warm days in my suburban neighborhood when you think absolutely nothing strange is going to happen. I was sitting at the dining room table when my wife asked me to run to the grocery store. It was a small request, something we needed for dinner, and I figured I'd be back in under 20 minutes. Now, the layout of our house makes it easy to shortcut through the garage. The dining room connects directly to it, so instead of going out the front door and walking around to the car, I just went through the garage like I always do. I hit the button to raise the garage door, and as it slowly began to lift, I grabbed my keys and headed for the opening. But the moment I ducked under the rising door, I froze. There were two people standing directly in front of me, barely 10 feet away, a man and a woman. Both of them overweight, motionless, and staring like they had been waiting. The man stood tall, blank-faced, while the woman cradled something in her arms. It took me a second to process what I was seeing, and even then, I couldn't fully make sense of it. She wasn't holding a real baby. It was a toy, clearly plastic and lifeless, but she was rocking it gently, whispering to it like it was crying. She muttered something like, "Sheh, it's okay," while never once looking up at me. Her movements were too delicate for something fake, and that part alone made my skin crawl. It was so surreal that I didn't know what to say. I mumbled something polite, maybe a hello, then asked if I could help them. I thought maybe they were lost, maybe mentally unstable, maybe harmless. But the way the man looked at me, completely silent, eyes locked to mine, was something else entirely. Then he asked me for a ride. He wanted me to take them to the store. It was so direct and so casual that it threw me off completely. I was literally on my way to the store, but something about this whole thing told me not to admit that. I told him I couldn't, that I was busy, that I had something else going on. Immediately, his entire expression changed. His face went red, like a switch had been flipped inside him, like he was offended that I'd said no. The woman still didn't react, still rocking her fake baby, still whispering softly to it. I walked around them, not turning my back fully, and got into my car. As soon as I sat down, I locked the doors. The garage door was still half open, and I reached up and pressed the button on the visor to close it. As it began to slide down, the man stared through my windshield without blinking. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. I called my wife immediately and told her what was happening. I told her to make sure every door and window in the house was locked. She asked if I wanted to stay home instead, but I told her no. It felt better to get out of there. They eventually began walking down the sidewalk, heading off down the street. I didn't see where they went, just watched them until they were out of sight. It was so strange, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting specifically for someone to come out of that garage. It didn't feel random. It felt placed. The store was only a few miles away. I went in, grabbed what we needed, and got out quickly. I tried to shake the feeling of the encounter, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the awkwardness, not the weird fake baby, not even the man's silence, but the way they had both been positioned in my driveway, so close, so still. On the way back, I was driving slowly through the neighborhood. The sun had dipped a little lower, shadows stretching across the sidewalks. That's when I saw them again, the same two people. The woman still had the fake baby in her arms. The man looked up the second he saw my car and immediately changed his expression again. It was subtle, but I could see it. Something like anger, or maybe recognition. He walked right into the street. Not quickly. Not like he was trying to cross. He just stepped into my path. I hit the brakes hard. He was yelling something at me, but I couldn't hear it through the glass. I didn't want to. I pulled around him slowly, keeping my eyes forward. When I looked in the rearview mirror, he was still standing there, watching my car drive away. When I got home, I told my wife what had happened. We decided to call the local non-emergency number, not because anything technically criminal had happened, but because the whole thing felt dangerous. They told us an officer would drive through the area and check around. We never saw those two again. No one we talked to knew who they were. No neighbors reported anything. No one else had a similar story. We didn't find out if they lived around here or had just been passing through. No missing persons matched their descriptions. The police never followed up. But for weeks afterward, I kept expecting them to come back. I left the garage door shut permanently, started going through the front entrance like a normal person. My wife and I double-checked locks every night before bed. I kept a light on in the hallway, and even though nothing happened after that, I never forgot how they looked. The blank, staring man. The woman whispering to a fake baby. I don't know what they wanted. A ride, maybe. Or maybe something worse. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I said yes. If I had opened my car door, invited them in, driven them wherever they asked. Maybe they just wanted to go to the store like he said. Maybe they just needed help. But something tells me they weren't headed to any store. Something tells me I made the right call. So if you're ever asked for a ride by strangers in your own driveway, think twice. And whatever you do, don't assume you're safe just because it's daylight, just because it's your neighborhood, just because you're standing on your own property. Some people know exactly where to find you, and they don't knock. They wait. This didn't happen to me directly, but every time I replay the story in my head, I feel like I'm right there, in that elevator, trying not to breathe too loud. It happened to my mom's friend in Seoul, South Korea, about 10 years ago. She lived in a modest apartment complex, one of those tall buildings that line the city streets like teeth. She was a stay-at-home mother, young and careful, with a little daughter she raised mostly alone during the day, while her husband worked full-time. It was a normal afternoon. She'd been out running errands with her daughter, probably picking up groceries or dry cleaning or something routine like that. Nothing out of the ordinary. They came home with their bags and walked through the building entrance into the lobby. She was tired. Her daughter was yawning, and all she could think about was getting inside, putting everything down, and maybe grabbing a moment to rest before dinner. She pressed the button for the elevator and waited, her daughter holding her hand. When the doors opened, she stepped inside and noticed a man already standing in the corner. At first glance, he didn't seem too unusual, except for one thing. He was wearing a yellow raincoat and a yellow cap. That might not sound strange to someone used to gloomy weather or damp cities, but that day had been dry, hot, and bright. There wasn't a drop of rain in the forecast. She immediately found it odd. His head was tilted downward, almost like he was avoiding eye contact, and he held something tightly under his arm. It was wrapped in newspaper. Something about the way he stood, angled and stiff, sent a cold ripple down her back. She instinctively pulled her daughter closer, placing herself between the man and the child. He didn't acknowledge her at all. Oh, just stood there, head low, motionless, breathing a little too hard. She pressed the button for her floor. The man didn't press anything. No other buttons were lit. That meant he had either already chosen his floor, or he was planning to get off on hers. The elevator began to move, and with each passing floor, she felt her nerves rising. The way he clutched the item in newspaper made her think it could be anything, a tool, a weapon, something meant to harm. It was the kind of grip someone used when they weren't holding something for convenience, but for a specific purpose. The woman knew something was off. She couldn't just stand there in silence, hoping this stranger with hidden intentions would mind his own business. So she pulled out her phone and pretended to make a call. She didn't actually dial anyone, just lifted it to her ear and started talking loudly. "Honey, I'm in the elevator now. Can you open the door for me when I get up? I'm just a minute away. Be ready, okay?" She kept talking, kept her voice loud and cheerful, trying to sound like her husband was right there in the apartment, waiting for her to arrive. The man didn't react. He didn't turn his head or even shift his stance. The elevator reached her floor. She lived on the 12th, or something close to that, and she walked out as quickly and calmly as possible, pulling her daughter along by the hand. Her apartment was down the hall, maybe 20 steps from the elevator. The second she stepped into the corridor, she could hear footsteps behind her. He had exited with them. She could feel him following. Her fake conversation continued, louder now. "I'm almost to the door. You can unlock it now. I'll be right there." No one was home. Her husband was still at work. But she kept up the act, hoping it was enough. She reached her apartment door, set down her bags, and started banging. She yelled, "I'm home. Open up." No one answered, obviously. but she acted like someone was moving behind the door. Like footsteps were coming, like a lock was turning. From the corner of her eye, she could see the man pause behind her, just a few feet away, still silent, still holding whatever it was in the newspaper. And then, slowly, he turned. He walked away, back toward the elevator. She waited. She waited until he disappeared around the corner, and only then picked up her daughter and frantically began punching in her key code. The problem was that the buttons made noise, loud, clear beeps. And when she hit the first one, she heard footsteps again. He was running back, charging toward her. She could hear the speed, the urgency, the shifting of weight as he moved fast down the hallway. She got the last number in, and the door clicked. She shoved her daughter through the opening and forced herself in behind her, slamming the door shut with everything she had. Just as the man reached them, she turned the lock, and a second later, he hit the door. Not with his full weight, just barely, but enough to make it shake. Her heart was pounding. She looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, breathing hard. And then he walked away again, back down the hallway, back to the elevator. That night, her husband came home and she told him everything. They called the building management and reported what had happened. A few other residents said they'd seen the man loitering near the back stairwells, but no one knew who he was. No one could say where he'd come from. A few months passed, and things went quiet again. She never saw the man in the raincoat again. Then one day, she turned on the news. There had been a big arrest. A man suspected of multiple murders. A serial killer. The news anchors showed his face, his name, Yu Young-chol, the same man who had been stalking prostitutes and bludgeoning them to death. He'd been living not far from her part of town. The footage from the arrest showed them dragging him out of some dark room. His head was low. He wasn't saying anything. And he was wearing a yellow raincoat, a yellow cap. She sat down and stared at the screen, paralyzed. There was no doubt in her mind. That was him, the man from the elevator, the one who followed her down the hallway, the one who almost made it through her door. And he had been carrying something under newspaper. Even now, she thinks about what would have happened if she hadn't faked that phone call. If she hadn't acted like someone was waiting behind the door. If her daughter hadn't been there to remind her what she was protecting. Sometimes we don't understand how close danger comes until long after it's passed. That elevator ride, those 12 floors, that dim hallway, it could have been the end. But for whatever reason, she made it out, and he moved on to someone else. It happened about 2 years ago, on a night that should have been simple. I was driving back home from a family reunion, and it was late, later than I had planned. Everyone else was staying the night, but I couldn't. I had work the next morning and didn't want to lose the day. So I said my goodbyes, waved off their concerns about the drive, and hit the road. The drive was about 2 hours long, mostly through back roads that cut between thick stretches of woods and farmland. You know, the kind of roads, no street lights, barely any signs. Just a long tunnel of your headlights leading you forward while the blackness outside presses up against your windows. It was peaceful at first. The cool night air, the low hum of the engine, the occasional glow of another car passing on the opposite side. But after a little more than an hour, something changed. A wave of exhaustion hit me out of nowhere. It was sudden, heavy, like someone had turned off a switch inside me. One moment I was alert. The next I was fighting to keep my eyes open. My brain started to fog up. I rubbed my face, blinked hard, even rolled down the windows to let the air hit me, but nothing worked. I told myself to push through, just a little longer. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going to make it all the way. There were no gas stations or rest stops on these roads, no driveways to pull into, no shoulder to safely park on. The only real option was the brush lining the road. So, as stupid as it sounds now, I made the decision to pull over behind a patch of bushes. I just needed a few minutes, just to rest my eyes. Just enough to stop that dangerous swaying I could already feel in the wheel. I checked the time. It was 11:22. I shut off the engine, leaned the seat back, and let the darkness swallow the car. It felt private there, almost hidden from the road. I could still hear occasional cars pass by, their faint rumble trailing into silence again. Then I drifted off. The next thing I remember was a sound. Not loud, not aggressive, just a subtle scratching, a brushing noise. It was faint, like something lightly touching the exterior of the car. I opened my eyes, still groggy, and looked at the dashboard clock. It was 11:50. I sat up, heart beating a little faster than it should have, and glanced around. Nothing. The noise had stopped. I told myself it was probably a branch, or maybe some small animal. After all, I was tucked right against a mess of overgrown brush. It made sense. Nothing to worry about. Still, I was uneasy now. I should have driven away then. Should have forced myself to stay awake. But I didn't. I was just too tired. I leaned back again, closed my eyes, and let the weight of my exhaustion pull me under. When I woke again, it was 12:40, and the sound was back. Only this time, it didn't stop. The same light scratching, moving along the back window now, slow and deliberate. I sat perfectly still, too scared to even breathe loud. My mouth had gone dry. Something about the rhythm of the sound, the patience behind it, made my skin crawl. I stared at the rearview mirror, and just for a split second, I saw movement. A shape, a blur. Something tall ducking quickly into the forest line behind the car. My blood ran cold. That wasn't an animal. That was a person. I didn't wait. My instincts slammed into my chest like a hammer. I started the car, threw it into gear, and sped back onto the road, gravel spitting from the tires. The silence inside the car was deafening. I could feel my heart hammering in my throat. I didn't look back. But as I rounded a bend just a few hundred yards up the road, my headlights swept across something that made my stomach twist. Another car, parked off the side of the road. Its driver's side door was wide open. I slowed down, instinctively, not even meaning to. My eyes scanned the interior. It looked empty. But before I could fully process what I was seeing, something moved again. From the shadows, a man came sprinting out, full speed, straight at me. He was yelling, his voice muffled by the glass, but the tone was violent, urgent. He screamed something like, "Hey, you, get out." He wasn't asking for help. He was demanding something. I didn't think. I pressed the gas and swerved around him. He lunged toward the car, arms out, but missed. And just like that, he disappeared into the darkness behind me. I drove. Fast. Not caring about the limits or the bends in the road. I didn't stop again until I made it all the way back home, parked in my driveway with the engine still running, and locked the doors from the inside. Only then did I start to understand what I had avoided. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if I had ignored the second scratching sound like I did the first, if I had waited just 10 minutes more, I might have never left that patch of roadside again. The man in the woods, whoever he was, had come back for me. The car ahead might have been bait, or maybe it belonged to someone else he had already gotten to. The thought kept looping in my head for days, weeks. I never reported it. What would I even say? That a shadow scratched my car and a man screamed at me in the middle of nowhere? There were no plates I could remember, no face I could describe, no crime technically committed, but I know what I felt. That pure animal fear, that voice inside screaming to run, and I listened to it. To this day, I won't pull over on forest roads. I don't nap in my car. I don't trust quiet moments in the dark. Because there are people out there who wait. People who see a sleeping stranger behind the wheel, tucked safely away from the lights and the crowds. and see an opportunity. Some of them knock, some of them scratch, and some of them are already inside your blind spot before you ever wake up. This happened when I had just stepped into my teenage years, around 13, during a strange family trip to a city hotel. I never fully understood why we were there. No birthdays, no reunions, no holiday to celebrate. My parents had booked a few rooms for us and some family friends, and the plan was to relax for a few days. That's all I was told. It didn't matter to me at the time. I was just excited to be away from home, surrounded by people I knew, and staying in a hotel that felt bigger than it really was. The building had a weird layout, one I still remember in vivid detail. The lobby was located on the 4th floor, not the ground level, which always felt backward. You had to take the elevator to reach it. The stairs didn't even go there. If you didn't have access to the elevators, you couldn't reach the front desk. The whole place was shaped like a square, with each floor wrapping around a hollow center. From the halls outside your room, you could lean over the railing and look all the way down into the lobby and a cafe, 8 stories below. As a kid with a fear of heights, I hated how exposed it made everything feel. It was the kind of place where you constantly felt watched. The first couple of days passed like a dream. I spent most of my time with other kids in the group, watching whatever garbage was on TV, eating junk food, and exploring the hallways while whispering ghost stories to freak each other out. It was fun, even though there was this constant feeling that something about the place was off. The ceilings were too high, the lights too cold, the air too still, but I ignored it. On the 3rd morning, I woke up to screaming. It was distant, echoing from below, bouncing up through the hollow center of the hotel. I stepped into the hallway and looked over the balcony. Down in the lobby, a girl was lying on the floor, surrounded by shattered food containers and spilled milk. Adults swarmed around her. Some tried to lift her. Others stood frozen. She wasn't moving. I spotted my parents and some friends down there, watching from the cafe area, and I decided to meet them to find out what had happened. The elevators were located on the opposite side of the floor, and I didn't feel like walking all the way around, so I chose the stairwell beside my room. We were high up, maybe the 7th or 8th floor, but I didn't mind the walk. As I descended, I kept my eyes peeled for the lobby level. I expected a sign, a door, something, but the numbers on the wall skipped what should have been the 4th floor. I passed the 5th, then what should have been the 4th, then the 3rd, then the 2nd. Still no doors, just concrete steps leading deeper down. I told myself I'd already gone too far to turn back, so I kept walking. Eventually, the stairs ended. I reached a cold, dimly lit floor with cinder block walls and a concrete floor. There was a set of heavy double doors. The air smelled stale, like dust and something faintly chemical. I told myself it must be another path to the lobby and pushed them open. Beyond the doors was a massive warehouse-like room, far larger than any part of the hotel I had seen. Everything inside was coated in grime. Tables and chairs were stacked along the walls, many of them broken or wrapped in plastic. There were boxes piled in the distance, covered in sheets. It didn't look like a place people visited often. I stepped inside slowly, unsure whether I was even supposed to be there. Toward the back wall, I saw an elevator that looked larger than the ones upstairs. I made my way toward it, trying not to think about the shadows collecting in the corners of the room. When I reached the elevator and pressed the button, nothing happened. There was a card scanner beside it, and I guessed it required staff access. That's when I decided I needed to go back. But when I turned to leave, I saw the door I had entered through standing closed. I pulled the handle, locked. Panic didn't hit me all at once. It crept in. I circled the room, searching for another exit, hoping I had missed something. Another door stood on the far side, partially hidden by shelving. I raced toward it and tried it too, also locked. Then it sank in. I was trapped. Alone, underground, without my phone, and without anyone knowing where I was. My family probably assumed I was still asleep in the room. I yelled, hoping someone might hear me through the stairwell, but the only response was my own echo. I had just started to truly panic when I heard one of the far doors creak open. Not the stairwell door, a different one. From the hallway beyond it, a man stepped out. He looked to be in his 40s, tall, pale, wearing a long white lab coat that was too clean for this filthy room. He paused when he saw me, like I was the last thing he expected to find. He wasn't holding a phone. He didn't wear a hotel badge. He just stood there, his eyes scanning me, taking me in. Something in my brain told me not to trust him. He motioned for me to follow and began walking through the room, not toward the elevator or the stairwell, but into one of the darker corners. I followed, slowly trying to stay a few steps behind. That's when I noticed we were passing the stairwell door, the one I had come from, the one he should have used to lead me out, but he didn't stop there. He kept walking. I did not. I froze and stared at the handle. I knew that was the way back, but it had been locked when I tried it before. I looked back at him. He had stopped too, watching me. His face was different now. He looked anxious. His forehead was shining with sweat. He didn't say a word, just turned again and continued deeper into the dark part of the basement. I knew something was wrong. This man wasn't staff. He didn't know where he was going. He had no key, no access, no answers. He was leading me somewhere else. And I remembered that no one knew where I was. So I did the only thing I could. I opened my mouth and screamed, loud, over and over. I poured every ounce of fear and desperation into that noise. I didn't care if it sounded crazy. I just needed someone to hear. The man flinched. He covered his ears, then shouted back, but I couldn't even process the words. I turned and ran for the stairwell door, praying it had somehow unlocked, praying I could reach it before he caught up. I grabbed the handle and pulled, and someone opened it from the other side. A janitor stepped through, wide-eyed, caught between confusion and caution. I nearly collapsed in relief. He took one look at me, then at the man behind me, and positioned himself between us. The man in the lab coat stopped walking and stood still, silent now, expression flat. I stayed behind the janitor, heart racing, trying to keep my legs from giving out. I couldn't make sense of anything. Who the man was, what he was doing down there, why the door had suddenly opened after being locked. Nothing added up. But I knew one thing for certain. He wasn't supposed to be there, and I wasn't supposed to survive that encounter. After the janitor stepped in and stood between me and the man in the lab coat, there was a moment where time just stopped. The air in that basement felt frozen, as if the whole building above us had fallen silent to witness what was happening in that room. I stood behind the janitor, too afraid to move, my knees locked, and my eyes fixed on the man who had been leading me into the darkest part of the hotel. The man didn't speak. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just looked at both of us with that same unreadable stare and slowly turned around. Then he walked away, deeper into the basement, vanishing into the part of the room I hadn't dared explore. The janitor didn't follow him. He kept glancing over his shoulder to make sure I was still behind him, then gently guided me through the stairwell door without saying a word. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to calm me down. He just got me out of that place. We climbed the stairs in silence. When we reached the 4th floor, he led me into a back hallway that connected to the lobby. There, another employee met us. She was from the front desk, young, wearing a blazer that looked 2 sizes too big for her. The janitor whispered something to her under his breath. She looked at me and nodded. Then she walked me the rest of the way through the lobby. I could see my family sitting near the breakfast area, still eating, still talking, still unaware that I had been missing. I was shaking, eyes wide, but they didn't notice right away. The employee calmly brought me to their table. I didn't sit down. I didn't need to. The moment they saw my face, my mother stood up, arms already open. I let her pull me in, but I couldn't speak yet. Not until I was sure we were far from the elevator. Later that evening, after I finally told them everything that had happened, they stared at me like I just told them I'd walked away from a burning building. At first, they didn't believe me. It sounded too far-fetched. A man in a lab coat wandering around the basement of a hotel. Locked doors. Forgotten stairwells. But when I described the warehouse room and the broken furniture and the elevator that needed a card to activate, my dad's face changed. He looked at my mom, then at me, and said we were done exploring. The hotel never followed up. No security came to our door. No manager knocked to explain anything. We left the next day like nothing had happened, like the whole thing had just been some odd dream we all agreed to forget. But I never forgot. Not any part of it. The following week, I kept thinking about that room. I couldn't stop imagining what would have happened if the janitor hadn't shown up when he did. I kept going over the choices in my head. If I hadn't screamed, if I had followed the man into the dark, if I hadn't noticed that we had walked past the only exit. It felt like I'd been circling a drain, each step pulling me further down into something I couldn't see, and only by pure chance did I get pulled out. I started to wonder about the door the man had come through, the one he claimed led to a bathroom. That door wasn't connected to any hallway I had seen before. It didn't look like it belonged to the hotel at all. It had been rusted, heavy, and wedged shut when I first noticed it. I kept thinking it must have connected to something else. Something behind the hotel, an alley, a loading dock, maybe even a back entrance that wasn't meant to be open. Weeks passed. The fear softened but never left. I kept imagining other kids making the same mistake, wandering down the wrong hallway, thinking they were just taking a shortcut. I wondered if anyone else had gotten trapped down there. Then a thought came that made my blood run cold. What if I hadn't been the first? I tried searching online for any incidents related to the hotel. I didn't find anything. No articles, no news reports. Nothing about any suspicious activity in that area. But that didn't mean it hadn't happened. That just meant it hadn't been reported. For a long time, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me. He didn't seem confused or surprised for long. He adjusted fast, like he had already thought about what he would do if someone saw him. He didn't panic. He didn't retreat. He tried to lead me somewhere else, somewhere deeper. The way he dressed still bothers me the most. That white lab coat, it was so clean. Too clean for a basement coated in dust and grime. He didn't look like someone who belonged to the building. He didn't have a name tag. He didn't carry keys or tools. It was like he was pretending. But pretending for who? He didn't expect the janitor to come through that door. He didn't expect me to scream. I think he was used to silence. I think whatever he was doing down there, he had done before. I never saw anything about him again. The hotel eventually faded into the background of my life. I moved on, grew older, but I never returned to that place. And I never trusted stairwells in hotels again. There was something too easy about the way I got lost. Too effortless. No signs. No locked doors until it was too late. It was like the building had been designed to pull me in, and I walked straight into it, blind and curious. Sometimes I wonder if he still goes back there. If he still walks through that warehouse, waiting for another voice, another pair of footsteps, another kid who doesn't know better. Sometimes I wonder if he's not the only one, because places like that don't just exist by accident, and people like him don't wander in without a purpose. That hotel is still open. People still stay there. Families, tourists, kids like me, and I know that basement hasn't changed. It's still down there, beneath the normal floors and the bright lights and the smiling front desk. Still cold, still quiet, still waiting. I live in a neighborhood that's generally safe, quiet, familiar. I've walked those streets for years and never really felt like I was in danger. Sure, we've had the occasional car break-in or mugging attempt, but nothing that ever made me feel like I needed to be afraid to walk home. That changed recently. It started with something simple. Our neighborhood had this big metal garbage container at the end of the block. Everyone used it, and it was close enough to my house that I could just take out the trash without thinking twice about it. Then, one day, someone pulled some strings and got the city to move the whole bin to a new location, somewhere farther out, closer to a busy intersection. I didn't love the idea of walking that far with trash bags in hand, especially through a busier area, but I adjusted. It became my habit to take the trash out at night, mostly to avoid the embarrassment of walking around with trash in the middle of the day. I knew it wasn't the smartest thing to do, especially for a woman walking alone after dark, but I got comfortable. Too comfortable. Then came last Sunday. It was already late. I had a few bags of trash to take out, and afterward, I wanted to stop by the little corner store just a few blocks down to grab a snack. It wasn't unusual for me. I'd done this a dozen times. So I did just that. Took the garbage down the street, dumped it into the new container, then walked the extra 2 minutes to the convenience store. I browsed a little, grabbed what I needed, and headed back home. Everything felt normal. Until I turned the corner into my street. There was a guy standing across the street from my house, right in front of my neighbor's driveway. He was on the phone, or at least pretending to be. His back was mostly turned, but I could hear his voice faintly. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't waiting by a car. He was just there, standing still. That alone wouldn't have scared me. What did scare me was what I saw next. There was another man, sitting silently on a motorbike, parked directly in front of my building, and he was staring at me. He wasn't scrolling his phone or checking directions. He was just watching me, like he had been waiting. The kind of look you don't forget. My mind ran through the math quickly. If I kept walking toward my front door, he could get to me before I could unlock it. The motorbike could go right over the sidewalk, right across the empty lot I normally used to escape creeps who followed me in cars. That trick wouldn't work this time, and I knew in my gut, clear as day, something was wrong. I didn't stop walking. I didn't let them know I was panicking. I just turned naturally and walked right back toward the convenience store. I didn't run. I didn't look back, but I could feel eyes on me. Back at the store, I hung around, pretending to browse. A few minutes passed. I bought a bottle of water I didn't need, looked at my phone. Then slowly, I started heading back again. When I reached my street the second time, they were both still there. Same man on the phone. Same guy on the motorbike. Still staring. Still waiting. And now I was completely sure this was planned. They were working together. I scanned the area, looking for something, anything. And that's when I saw the security booth down the street. A neighborhood guard, the kind who usually just waves at cars or half-naps in his chair. But he was there, awake. I walked straight toward him and explained what was happening. I told him about the two men, about the motorbike, about the way they had both locked onto me like I was their target. To his credit, the security guard didn't hesitate. He stood up, grabbed his flashlight, and walked back with me. As soon as we came into view, everything changed. The guy on the phone quickly ended his call and walked toward the motorbike. The man on the bike didn't say anything, but as soon as the other got close, he moved over to make space on the seat. The phone guy climbed on behind him, and then they both drove off, but not quickly. They passed us slowly. Their heads turned. Their eyes never left me. They didn't look startled or embarrassed. They looked disappointed, like something had slipped out of reach. The guard stood there with me until I got to my door. I thanked him, locked up tight, and sat in my living room trying to calm down. My mind kept playing the whole thing back, over and over. What would have happened if I had walked to my door the first time? What if I hadn't noticed the guy was already watching me? Would they have just asked me something? Tried to rob me? Or was it something worse? I kept picturing it. The motorbike rolling onto the sidewalk, a hand grabbing my arm before I could get my key in the lock. The other guy following behind, blocking the entrance, dragging me back. It wouldn't have taken much. A few seconds. That's all they would have needed. That's all I would have given them. I know how lucky I was. I trusted my gut. And that guard, that quiet, low-paid guy who probably never expected to be anything more than a neighborhood fixture, he may have saved my life. I haven't seen those two again since, but I don't walk alone at night anymore. Not even just to take out the trash. It's not about paranoia. It's about understanding how quickly things can shift. You think you're home. You think you're safe. Then suddenly 2 men are parked on either side of your life, waiting for you to make one wrong move. And when you turn around, they don't chase you, because they know they can wait. Maybe they weren't just passing by. Maybe they've been watching for longer than I realized. Maybe I had been a name on someone's list, a face tagged in someone's phone. That part, I'll never know. But I know this. I'll never forget how it felt to walk toward my door and realize someone else had already planned what would happen when I reached it. I used to make a decent living delivering pizzas. Back then, I was 27, working full-time for a local joint that gave us marked company cars. Basic white sedans plastered with the store logo. I delivered for other places before, but this job paid better than most. I even did some extra deliveries as a side hustle when money got tight. It was routine, money was steady, and aside from the occasional weirdo, I felt relatively safe. Until the night everything changed. It was a slow evening, unusually so for a Friday. I remember being relieved when I was finally handed a double order, both cash drops, which meant I could end the shift with a little more in my pocket. I had $12 left in my delivery bank. The first stop was smooth. A quiet guy handed me $50 for a $35 order. That extra tip gave me a brief sense of joy, like I was turning the night around. The second delivery was in an apartment complex I'd been to a few times before. It was a sprawl of identical buildings with faded numbers on the doors and poor lighting in the parking lots. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows over the lot. I pulled up in front of the building, grabbed the order, and walked toward the entrance. 2 people were outside. One was a scrawny kid, maybe late teens, who emerged from the building with a nervous glance around the lot. The other, a bulkier man in a hooded jacket, stood nearby smoking a cigarette. The larger man disappeared inside as the younger one approached me. I should have trusted the unease crawling up my spine, but I brushed it off. Too many deliveries had made me numb to the weird ones. The kid asked what he owed. His eyes kept darting around like he was being watched, or maybe waiting for someone. I told him the total again, and he shook his head like that wasn't what he expected. Then, I felt the barrel of a gun press against my right temple. It wasn't until I also felt something jab into my lower back that the horror settled in. There wasn't just one. There were 2. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe right. The one at my side hissed for my money and my keys. I didn't argue. I handed over the bank and my keys with shaking hands, not even remembering that the $50 bill was still inside. I was focused only on not dying. A third guy appeared from the side, maybe another teenager. He had a mop of curly hair and grabbed a pizza bag from my hands without a word before sprinting off behind the building. The kid with the gun at my back lingered for a second. I heard him say quietly, "Just do what he says. You'll get it back." I don't want to be here either. His voice was cracking. It sounded like he'd been crying. Then, as quickly as they'd come, they vanished, bolting across the lot as a car pulled in from the far side of the building. I just stood there, paralyzed. I didn't move. Couldn't. The gun was gone. but the phantom pressure still clung to my skull and spine. A woman got out of the car with her daughter and rushed toward me. I couldn't say anything at first. She guided me to her apartment nearby and locked the door behind us. Her boyfriend helped me call the police because my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the phone. I gave the operator every detail I could, including the loose clothing and colors. Though I'm colorblind and struggled to describe it, I'll never forget how kind they were to me. That family didn't owe me anything, but they kept me safe until the cops showed up. The police took my statement, contacted my store, and retrieved the spare keys for the car so I could drive it back. When I walked through the doors of the restaurant, my coworkers were crying and clinging to me like they thought I wouldn't come back. It struck me then how fragile the whole job really was. I'd risked my life for a pizza. I filed all the reports. The store wrote off the loss and told me to go home. My manager gave me a hug. One of the best bosses I'd ever had. Still, I didn't know that the night was far from over. Later, I called my best friend to decompress. He told me he was nearby at a dive bar. I needed a drink, so I met him there. His dad was a cop in the same district, and while we were shooting pool, his dad called. He said the police had picked up suspects and needed me to come ID them. Since I'd had a couple of shots, a patrol car was sent to pick me up. At the station, they lined them up. 3 boys and a driver. Caught not long after the robbery, speeding down a nearby highway. They'd already spent some of the money on gas and weed. My phone was found with 15 other stolen ones in a box on the floor of their car. The order they placed had come from one of those stolen phones. The officers told me to identify only my own phone. I found it instantly. I hadn't backed up any of my photos and had lied to the robbers about having lost a son to keep them from stealing it. That lie haunted me, even though it worked. I also told the cops something else. The kid behind me, the one who didn't want to be there, had tried to help me. I begged them to be merciful to him. Turns out, he was the only one talking. The others denied everything. The driver, I later learned, was just a friend giving them a ride and had no idea what was happening. He wasn't charged. 2 of the boys were 15 and 16. They got 6 months of house arrest. The one who spoke up got off easier because I'd asked for leniency. He planned to go to the police himself, or so he said. I believed him. Still do. But the ringleader, the one who held the gun to my temple first, he had just turned 18. He laughed at me in court, smirked like it was all a joke. The judge scolded him. He grinned wider. His eyes were cold, hollow. I knew right then he'd do it again. I requested anonymity in court. I didn't want him to know my name or where I lived. It felt safer. I'm so glad I did. Years passed. Then this year, I got a letter. The state notified me he was being released early. Not for good behavior. For overcrowding. Just 4 years into an 8-year sentence. I missed the deadline to protest because the letter went to my old address, my parents' place. They almost threw it away. Now, he's free. I've warned my wife, my family, even my neighbors. We all know his name and his face. If he ever comes near me again, I'm ready. To the woman and her boyfriend who took me in that night, I'll never forget you. I tried to find you again later to give you proper thanks. Even brought gifts for your little girl, but you'd moved out of that neighborhood. I'm glad you did. It wasn't safe. To the boy who held the gun to my back, but wanted no part in the horror, I hope you got your second chance and made something of it. I really do. But to the one who laughed at me in court, who looked at me like prey, let's never, ever meet again.